When Jack Turner pulled those twin girls from a burning school bus that October morning, he thought he was just doing what any decent person would do. He had no idea that their mother, standing in the smoke-filled chaos, tears streaming down her face, would recognize him. No idea that one act of courage would unravel a connection 3 years in the making. No idea that by sunset his entire life would be transformed forever. This is that story. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The morning of October 6th started like any other Thursday for Jack Turner. His alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it needed to, because the snooze button had become part of his morning ritual. He reached across the empty side of the bed, his hand finding only cold sheets where Sarah used to sleep, and felt that familiar hollow ache settle in his chest. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the cancer took her, and some mornings the wound felt as fresh as the day she'd closed her eyes for the last time. "Dad?" A small voice drifted through his bedroom door. "Dad, are you awake?" Jack forced himself upright, rubbing his face with both hands. "Yeah, Sophie, I'm up, sweetheart." His daughter appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her school uniform. Navy blue skirt, white blouse, that ridiculous plaid tie the Riverside Academy required. At 8 years old, Sophie Turner was the spitting image of her mother. Same honey-colored hair, same green eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever brave face Jack tried to wear. She clutched her backpack straps with both hands, rocking slightly on her heels. "I made toast," she announced, "and I didn't burn it this time." Jack felt his heart squeeze. 8 years old, and she was making breakfast. 8 years old, and she'd learned to be more independent than any child should have to be. He swung his legs out of bed, his lower back protesting. 42 years old, and his body already felt like it was 50. "You didn't have to do that, Soph." "I know." She smiled, that bright, heartbreaking smile that was all Sarah. "But you always sleep through your alarm, and I didn't want you to be late for work again." Work. The word carried weight. Riverside Auto Repair. The small garage Jack had bought 7 years ago, with dreams of building something, of providing for his family, of making his father proud. Now it was barely staying afloat. The bank had sent another letter last week, past due. Final notice. Words that kept Jack awake at night, staring at the ceiling, doing math that never quite added up. He followed Sophie down the narrow hallway of their rental house, the floorboards creaking under his weight. The kitchen was tiny, barely room for a table and 4 chairs, though they only needed 2 now. True to her word, Sophie had made toast. 2 slices sat on a plate beside a cup of coffee she'd attempted to make. It was the color of mud, and probably tasted like it too, but Jack picked it up and took a sip, forcing his face into an expression of appreciation. "Perfect," he lied. "You're getting really good at this." Sophie beamed, climbing into her chair and attacking her own toast with strawberry jam. Jack watched her for a moment, wondering how he'd gotten so lucky and so unlucky all at once. Lucky to have this brilliant, brave little girl. Unlucky to be raising her alone, scraping by, one unexpected expense away from disaster. His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Hector, his employee at the garage. "Morning, boss. Mrs. Chen's Honda needs a new timing belt. Told her $400. She's thinking about it." Jack typed back, "Tell her $350. We need the work." That was the reality now. Undercutting himself just to keep the lights on. He'd let go of his other mechanic 6 months ago, couldn't afford to keep him. Now it was just Jack and Hector, working 12-hour days, 6 days a week, barely making payroll. "Dad?" Sophie's voice pulled him back. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "That thing where your face goes all worried and you stare at nothing." She reached across the table and patted his hand, an 8-year-old comforting her father. The role reversal stung. "It's okay, we're okay." Jack forced a smile, covered her small hand with his. "Yeah, baby, we're okay." But were they? The rent was due in 5 days. Sophie needed new shoes. He'd noticed her current ones were getting tight. And his truck, the battered Ford F-150 currently sitting in the driveway, was making a noise that suggested the transmission was on its last legs. If that went, he'd be stuck. No transportation meant no work. No work meant... He stopped himself. Not now. Not this morning. This morning, he had to get Sophie to school, get himself to the garage, and somehow make it through another day. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, Sophie swinging her legs under the table, humming something that might have been a song from her favorite cartoon. Jack washed the dishes, all 4 of them, and grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. "Ready?" he asked. Sophie shouldered her backpack, nearly toppling backward from its weight. "Ready. Oh, Dad, don't forget, today's the recital." Jack's mind went blank. "The what?" "The recital." Sophie's eyes went wide with that particular panic children get when parents forget important things. "The fall concert. I'm playing Fur-Elise on the piano. I told you like 100 times." Shit. He had forgotten, completely forgotten. Between the bills and the work and the constant grinding stress, it had slipped through the cracks of his exhausted brain. "Right," he said quickly, crouching down to her level. "The recital. Of course. What time?" 10 o'clock, in the auditorium. Mrs. Patterson said parents should be there by 9:45. Jack did the math. It was 7:20 now. If he dropped Sophie at school, got to the garage by 8, he could put in a couple hours of work, then leave at 9:30. It would work. It had to work. "I'll be there," he promised, holding up his pinky. "Pinky swear." Sophie locked her pinky with his, the sacred contract of childhood. "You promise, promise?" "Promise, promise." The drive to Riverside Academy took 15 minutes through town. Riverside, Indiana, population 8,000. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Where the biggest excitement was usually high school football games and the annual 4th of July parade. Jack had grown up here, left for a few years to work in Indianapolis, then came back when Sophie was born. Sarah had wanted their daughter to grow up somewhere safe, somewhere small, somewhere with real community. He wondered what she'd think now, watching him struggle to keep their daughter's world from falling apart. Sophie chattered the whole drive, talking about her friend Emma, who could do a cartwheel, about the book she was reading for English class, about how Mr. Reeves, the math teacher, had accidentally called the principal Mom yesterday, and everyone laughed. Jack listened, making appropriate sounds, loving the sound of her voice even as his mind spun through the day's challenges ahead. They were approaching the railroad crossing on the eastern edge of town, the crossing where the old freight line cut through, rarely used anymore, when Jack's phone rang. The caller ID showed Hector. He put it on speaker. "Yeah, what's up?" "Boss, we got a problem." Hector's voice was tight with stress. "That inspection we did on the mayor's Escalade? Found a cracked engine mount. Whole thing's about to go. And the brake lines are—" "How much?" Jack interrupted. "Parts and labor, $2,000, maybe $2,500. Jack's stomach dropped. The mayor, Tom Bridges, was not a patient man. He was also not a man who liked spending money. And he was definitely not a man Jack could afford to piss off, not when the garage's business license renewal was coming up. "Tell him I'll call him in an hour," Jack said. "I'll figure something out." He ended the call, gripping the steering wheel tighter. $2,000. Where the hell was he supposed to— "Dad, stop!" Sophie's scream cut through his thoughts like a blade. Jack's foot slammed on the brake instinctively, and the truck lurched to a halt. They were at the crossing. The barriers were up, no train in sight, but Sophie was pointing, her face white with terror. "Dad, look!" That's when Jack saw it. A school bus, one of the big yellow buses that ferried kids from the northern farms into town, was barreling toward the intersection from the perpendicular road. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The bus was moving too fast, weaving slightly, and as Jack watched in mounting horror, it tried to make the turn onto the crossing road. It didn't make it. The bus tipped. Jack heard the screech of metal, the explosive bang of tires blowing, and then the entire vehicle rolled onto its side with a crash that seemed to shake the earth. It slid across the asphalt like a wounded animal, sparks flying from the grinding metal, and came to rest half in the ditch, half on the road. For one suspended second, there was silence. Then the screaming started. "Stay here!" Jack barked at Sophie, already throwing open his door. "Stay in the truck, you hear me? Don't move!" He was running before his brain fully caught up with his body. His volunteer firefighter training, 6 years of Thursday night sessions at the station, The certification he'd earned more as a community service than anything else kicked in like muscle memory. The bus lay on its driver's side, windows shattered, the yellow paint scraped and dented. Black smoke was beginning to curl from the engine compartment, not thick yet, but growing fast. Jack's stomach went cold. He'd seen enough vehicle fires to know what came next. Flame. Help! A voice from inside the bus, young, terrified. Help us, please! Jack reached the bus, his boots crunching on broken glass. Through the shattered windshield, he could see the driver slumped over the wheel, blood on his face. Behind him, in the cabin, chaos. Maybe 15 kids, ranging from kindergarten to middle school, some thrown from their seats, some trapped by the angle of the overturned bus. And in the back, pressed against the now upward-facing windows, he saw them. Twin girls. Maybe 6 years old. Identical, same dark hair and pigtails, same purple backpacks, same wide, terrified eyes. They were trapped in the corner where the bus body met the roof, and below them, Jack could see the orange glow starting to build. Fire. Okay, Jack muttered to himself, forcing his breathing steady. He grabbed the emergency door, the one on the roof, now on the side, and pulled the release handle. Nothing. The impact had jammed it. He pulled harder, muscles straining, but the door wouldn't budge. The smoke was getting thicker. Inside, kids were crying, coughing. Someone was calling for their mom. Jack looked around frantically. A rock, a piece of rebar, anything. His eyes landed on a section of fractured asphalt near the ditch. He grabbed it, hefted its weight, maybe 20 pounds of broken concrete, and slammed it into the door's window. The glass spiderwebbed but didn't break. Behind it, the twin girls' faces appeared, pressing against the window, hands beating weakly. "Get back!" Jack shouted. "Cover your faces!" He pulled off his jacket, wrapped it around the concrete chunk, and swung with everything he had. This time, the glass exploded inward with a satisfying crash. Jack knocked out the remaining shards, creating an opening just big enough to crawl through. "I'm coming in," he called. "Everyone stay calm." He pulled himself up and through the window, dropping into the bus's interior. The angle was disorienting. Everything sideways, seats hanging like obstacles in a nightmare funhouse. The smell hit him immediately. Diesel fuel, burning rubber, and underneath it all something sweet and acrid that meant the fire was spreading. "Come on!" Jack grabbed the nearest kid, a boy of maybe 10, glasses hanging off his face. "Out the window now!" He lifted the boy up toward the opening. Small hands appeared from outside. Someone had arrived to help. Thank God. The boy was pulled through, and Jack turned to the next child, a girl with braids, then a small boy clutching a lunchbox. One by one, he passed them up and out, his shoulders screaming, his lungs burning from the smoke. Behind him, toward the back of the bus, the orange glow was brighter now. Flames were visible, licking up from the engine compartment through the buckled floor. "Almost there!" someone outside was shouting. "Keep going!" Jack grabbed another kid, then another. His eyes were streaming, his throat raw. How many were left? He couldn't tell through the smoke. He just kept moving, kept lifting, kept... A small hand grabbed his arm. One of the twins. Up close, Jack could see the terror in her face, the tears cutting tracks through the soot on her cheeks. Her voice was a whisper. "My sister." Jack looked past her. The other twin was trapped. A section of the bus's roof had buckled in the crash, pinning one of the overturned seats, which had caught her backpack. She was pulling frantically, but the angle and her size meant she couldn't generate enough force to break free. And the fire was right below her, flames now visible through the floor panels, heat radiating up in waves. "Okay, sweetheart, I got her." Jack pushed the first twin toward the window. "You climb up, right now. Go!" She hesitated, looking back at her sister. "But now!" Jack's command voice, the one he'd learned from his father, the one that brooked no argument, and the girl obeyed, scrambling toward the opening. Jack turned to the trapped twin. The fire was maybe 6 feet away, spreading fast along spilled diesel fuel. He could feel the heat on his face, feel his skin tightening. No time. No time for finesse. He grabbed the seat frame that had the girl's backpack caught and pulled. Nothing. The metal was wedged tight, caught on another seat. The girl whimpered, pulling helplessly at her backpack straps. "Forget the bag," Jack said, already reaching for her. Arms out of the straps, honey. Come on. But her hands were shaking too badly. She couldn't work the clasps. Jack could see the fire reflected in her wide eyes, could smell burning plastic as the flames found something new to consume. 5 feet away. 4. Okay, new plan. Jack grabbed his keychain from his pocket. Attached to it was a small folding knife, the one he used for cutting through packaging at the garage. He flipped it open, grabbed the backpack straps, and sawed through them. The nylon parted, and suddenly, the girl was free. Jack scooped her up, turned toward the window. And that's when the world exploded. The fire reached the fuel tank. Jack didn't hear the explosion so much as feel it. A wall of force and heat that picked him up and threw him forward. He curled around the girl instinctively, his body making itself a shield as they flew through the air. They hit something hard. The ground, Jack's brain supplied distantly, and rolled. Jack felt skin scrape off his arm, felt his ribs connect with something solid, felt his head snap back and crack against asphalt. Stars burst behind his eyes. Then darkness swam up, and he fell into it. When Jack came to, he wasn't sure if seconds or hours had passed. His ears were ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. His vision was blurry, doubled. Something wet was running down his face, blood, probably. He tried to sit up, and pain exploded through his left side, sharp enough to make him gasp. Easy, easy, don't move. Hands on his shoulders, pushing him gently back down. Jack blinked hard, trying to focus. A face appeared above him, someone he didn't recognize, a woman in a green shirt. The paramedics are coming. You're going to be okay. The girl, Jack managed, his voice coming out as a croak. The twin, she's okay. You got her out. You got them all out. Jack let his head fall back against the ground, relief flooding through him strong enough to make him lightheaded. Or maybe that was the concussion, hard to tell. Around him, chaos. He could turn his head enough to see the burning hulk of the school bus, flames now completely engulfing it, black smoke billowing into the morning sky. Fire trucks were arriving. Jack could hear the sirens even through the ringing in his ears, and someone was shouting instructions. Children were scattered across the road and the grass beyond, some sitting, some standing, some being examined by people in civilian clothes who must have stopped to help. All alive. Thank God. All alive. Sir, can you hear me? A different voice now, male, professional. A paramedic, Jack realized, as his vision cleared enough to make out the blue uniform. Can you tell me your name? Jack Turner, he said. His tongue felt thick, his mouth full of copper. I was just driving by and the bus... You did good, Jack. The paramedic was doing something to Jack's arm, wrapping it. Real good, but you're hurt. We need to get you transported. I'm fine. Jack tried to sit up again, and again the pain in his ribs made him reconsider. Just my daughter, Sophie. She's in my truck. I left her. The little blonde girl? She's okay. One of the deputies is with her. Jack's eyes found his F-150, still parked where he'd left it on the other side of the crossing. Through the windshield, he could see Sophie's face pressed against the glass, watching. Even from here, he could see she was crying. I need to... Jack started. You need to lie still, the paramedic said firmly. You've got burns, possible broken ribs, definitely a concussion. You're not walking anywhere, Mr. Turner. As if to prove the point, Jack's vision chose that moment to swim again, the world tilting sideways. He felt himself being lifted, being moved onto something flat and firm. A backboard, his distant medic training supplied. Straps went across his chest and legs, securing him. The driver, Jack said. The bus driver, is he... Being transported to County General. He had a seizure, we think. That's what caused the crash. The paramedic's face appeared above Jack again, shining a light in his eyes. Jack winced. Follow my finger. Good. Other eye. Good. The stretcher was moving now, being wheeled toward an ambulance. Jack caught fragments of the scene around him. A fire chief shouting orders, water arcing through the air onto the burning bus, someone with a camera, probably local news. And everywhere, people staring at him with expressions he couldn't quite parse. The stretcher stopped. Jack found himself looking up at a woman he didn't recognize. She was in her late 30s, maybe, dressed in a business suit that was now covered in dust and ash. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her face was streaked with tears. "You," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved them. You saved my babies." Babies. Jack's foggy brain made the connection. The twins. "Are they okay?" he asked. "I got them out, but they're fine, thanks to you." The woman's hand covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. I can't. How do I even thank you for—" "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we need to go." The paramedic's hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "You can see him at the hospital." The woman nodded, stepped back. Jack saw her turn, saw two small figures in purple backpacks running to her, saw her drop to her knees and gather them into her arms. The twins. All three of them crying, holding each other like the world might try to tear them apart again. Then the ambulance doors were closing, and the scene disappeared from view. The siren wailed to life, and Jack felt the vehicle begin to move. He closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "Hang in there, Mr. Turner," the paramedic said, adjusting something on the IV line Jack hadn't realized he'd been given. "You're a hero today, a real hero." But Jack didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a father who'd left his daughter alone in a truck, who'd forgotten her recital, who couldn't pay his bills. He felt like a man who'd gotten lucky. Lucky he'd been there, lucky he'd acted fast enough, lucky the explosion hadn't killed him. Lucky and so tired. "Sophie," he mumbled, "I need to— She's supposed to play piano today. Für Elise. I promised I'd be there. I'm sure they'll understand given the circumstances." The paramedic's voice was kind, patient. "Don't worry about that right now. Just rest." Rest. As if he could. As if his mind could stop spinning through the implications. Missed work, medical bills he couldn't afford. Sophie scared and alone. The hit just kept coming, didn't they? Every time Jack thought he had his feet under him, every time he thought maybe they'd be okay, the universe found a new way to knock him down. But those kids were alive. The twins were with their mother. The bus driver would probably survive. That had to count for something, right? That had to— Jack's thoughts scattered as the pain medication in the IV kicked in, pulling him down into darkness. His last conscious thought was of Sophie's face against the truck window and the promise he'd made her. The promise he'd broken. Again. The next few hours existed in fragments for Jack. Bright lights, voices, hands prodding his ribs. Broken, definitely broken. 3 of them, according to someone in Scrubs. More lights, brighter this time, as they checked his pupils again and again. Someone asking him questions. "What's your name? What day is it? Who's the president?" Jack answering automatically, his voice sounding far away even to himself. Somewhere in there, a doctor, young, female, with kind eyes, telling him he was lucky. 2nd-degree burns on his arms and back, but nothing that wouldn't heal. The ribs would hurt like hell for a few weeks, but would mend. The concussion was mild, all things considered. He'd need to rest, take it easy, come back for follow-ups. Lucky. There was that word again. When Jack finally surfaced to something resembling full consciousness, he found himself in a hospital room. Not the ER, an actual room with a bed and monitors and a window showing afternoon light. How long had he been out? He turned his head, carefully, because even that small movement sent lightning through his skull, and found Sophie. She was asleep in the chair beside his bed, curled up like she used to curl up in Sarah's lap, her blonde hair falling across her face. Someone had given her a blanket, one of those thin hospital blankets that never kept anyone warm, and she'd wrapped it around herself like armor. Jack's throat tightened. He'd put that look on her face, the tear-stained, exhausted look of a child who'd been scared out of her mind. She didn't want to leave. A new voice, male, familiar. Jack looked toward the door and found Hector standing there, his work coveralls still on, grease under his fingernails. "Been here since they brought you in. Watched the whole surgery on your arm through the window like a little guard dog." "Hector," Jack's voice came out as a rasp. What am I doing here? Making sure you're not dead, boss." Hector stepped into the room, pulled up another chair. He was a big man, Hector Reyes, 6'3", built like he worked with his hands because he did. He'd been with Jack for 4 years, loyal through all the rough patches, never complaining when paychecks came late. Half the town's in the waiting room. Mrs. Chen brought tamales. The mayor sent flowers. The mayor... Jack started to laugh, then stopped because it hurt too much. His Escalade, already taken care of. Hector waved a dismissive hand. Pulled the engine mount, replaced it, did the brake lines, called in a favor from Jimmy at the parts shop. Mayor picked it up an hour ago, seemed happy. Jack stared at him. How did you... We don't have the money for... I covered it. Hector shrugged like it was nothing, like he hadn't just spent money Jack knew he didn't have to spare. You can pay me back whenever, or don't. Doesn't matter. Hector? Jack. Hector leaned forward, his expression serious. You pulled kids out of a burning bus this morning. One of them was Mayor Bridges' nephew. Did you know that? The kid with the glasses, first one you got out. That was Tyler Bridges. The mayor's been calling you a hero all day, so please, let me do this one small thing without arguing, okay? Jack wanted to argue anyway, wanted to explain that he couldn't keep accepting help, couldn't keep being the one people had to rescue. But the look on Hector's face stopped him. This wasn't charity, this was friendship, and Jack had too few of those to throw one away over pride. Thank you, Jack said quietly. Hector nodded, satisfied. Then his expression shifted, became almost uncomfortable. There's, something else. That woman, the mother of the twin girls you saved, she's been here, waiting to talk to you. Jack's memory, still fuzzy around the edges, conjured up an image. A woman in a business suit, tears on her face, saying something about her babies. Is she in the waiting room, though, with about 100 other people, but she's been persistent. Told the nurses she'd wait all day if she had to. Hector paused. She's got security with her, like actual bodyguards. And she arrived in a car that costs more than your garage, so I'm thinking maybe she's somebody? Before Jack could process this, Sophie stirred. Her eyes opened, and for a moment she looked confused, disoriented. Then she saw Jack awake and watching her, and her face crumpled. Dad! She launched herself from the chair onto the bed, and Jack bit back a groan as her weight hit his broken ribs. But he wrapped his arms around her anyway, pulled her close despite the pain, because this was his daughter, and she'd been terrified, and that mattered more than a few broken bones. I'm okay, Soph, he whispered into her hair. I'm okay, baby. I'm sorry I scared you. You jumped into a fire, Sophie said, her voice muffled against his hospital gown. You jumped into a fire and then it exploded and I thought, shh, I'm okay. Look. Jack held her back slightly so she could see his face. I'm fine. Just some bumps and bruises. I'll be home tomorrow probably. The doctor said 3 days minimum, Hector interjected. Observation for the concussion. Sophie pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I saw the whole thing. You were so brave, Dad. You saved all those kids. I was just doing what anyone would. No. Sophie's voice was firm, surprisingly adult. Not anyone. You. You did that. She paused, then added quietly, Mom would be proud. And there it was, the knife straight to Jack's heart. Sarah would be proud. Sarah, who'd made Jack promise on her deathbed to take care of their daughter, to keep her safe, to give her a good life. Sarah, who'd believed Jack was capable of more than he believed himself. Yeah, Jack managed. Yeah, she would be. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in, not the young one from before, but an older woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression. Mr. Turner, you have a visitor. She's been quite insistent. The nurse's tone suggested she'd been dealing with quite insistent for several hours now. Are you up for company? Jack looked at Hector, who shrugged, at Sophie, who was watching him with those green eyes so like her mother's. Then he nodded. Sure. Send her in. The nurse disappeared, and a moment later the woman from the crash site entered. Up close, cleaned up, she was striking, not beautiful in a magazine way, but handsome, with strong features and dark eyes that held intelligence and something Jack couldn't quite name. Exhaustion, maybe. Or relief. She was still in the suit, though she'd ditched the jacket. Behind her, just visible through the doorway, Jack could see what Hector had meant. 2 men in dark clothes, professional, alert. Security. The woman stopped inside the door, seeming suddenly uncertain. Her eyes went from Jack to Sophie to Hector, then back to Jack. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I'm sorry to intrude. I know you need rest, but I—" Her voice caught. "I had to see you, had to thank you properly." "You already thanked me," Jack said, at the crash. "It's okay, really. I'm just glad the girls are all right." "They're perfect. Thanks to you." The woman took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it, maintaining her distance. "The doctors checked them over completely. Not a scratch. Emma, she's the one you saved first. She wants to meet you again when you're feeling better. Ellie, the one who was trapped, she hasn't stopped talking about the brave man who cut her free." Jack felt his face heat. Anyone would have—" "Please don't say that." The woman's voice was sharp enough to surprise him. "Don't diminish what you did. You risked your life. The fire chief told me that if you'd been 5 seconds slower, if you'd hesitated even a moment, both of my daughters would have—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. An uncomfortable silence fell. Sophie had gone very still beside Jack, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Hector had the look of a man trying to become invisible through sheer willpower. The woman took a breath, visibly composing herself. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "I'm Rachel Myers." She said it like it should mean something. Jack searched his tired brain but came up empty. "I'm sorry, should I—" "No reason you should know me," Rachel said quickly. "But I—" She paused, seemed to make a decision. "Do you remember, about 3 years ago, working on a car late at night? A black Lexus broken down on Highway 52? Jack frowned. 3 years ago. So much had happened 3 years ago. Sarah's final decline, the funeral, the impossible blur of grief and single parenthood. But yes, now that she mentioned it, there was something. A late-night call, a stranded motorist, a woman whose car had died in the middle of nowhere. "Maybe," he said. "I get a lot of late-night calls." It was in December, 2 days before Christmas. I was driving back from Chicago. My father had just died, and I was trying to get home to my daughters. Rachel's eyes were locked on Jack's now, intense. My car died. Just died. Middle of the highway, 9 o'clock at night, in the middle of nowhere. I called every garage, every tow service. Everyone said they couldn't get to me until morning. The memory was coming back now, fuzzy but real. Jack remembered the call, remembered the desperation in the woman's voice, remembered thinking about Sarah at home, sick, but insisting he go help. "You came," Rachel continued, "in your truck, with your tools. You spent 2 hours in the freezing cold fixing my car. The fuel pump, you said. And when I asked what I owed you," her voice broke again. "You said, 'Nothing. Merry Christmas. Just get home safe to your family.'" Jack did remember now. Remembered the woman's shock, her attempts to insist on paying. Remembered driving home thinking about how Sarah would have been proud of him for helping. How she'd always said that kindness was the only thing that really mattered in the end. "I couldn't accept money for that," Jack said. "Not right before Christmas. Not from someone who'd just lost their father. And today, you saved my children's lives." Rachel's hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles white. 3 years ago, you got me home to them when no one else would help. Today, you made sure I still have them to go home to. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand that I owe you everything?" "You don't owe me anything," Jack said, starting to feel uncomfortable with the intensity of her gratitude. "Really, I was just being who you are." Rachel smiled, though tears were streaming down her face now. "Just being a good man who helps people, but Mr. Turner, Jack, some of us don't forget that. Some of us spend 3 years trying to find a man who wouldn't take payment for his kindness, hoping for a chance to pay him back." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, stepped forward and placed it on the rolling table beside Jack's bed. He picked it up, squinted at it. "Rachel Myers, CEO, Myers Industries, Indianapolis." "In." Jack looked up sharply. Myers Industries. Even in his concussed state, he knew that name. Everyone in Indiana knew that name. They were, manufacturing? Tech? Something big. something that employed thousands of people and had their name on buildings. He started. Yes, Rachel said simply, and I want you to work for me. The room went very quiet. Even the beeping monitors seemed to pause. Jack stared at Rachel, certain he'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? I want you to work for me. Rachel's voice was steady now, businesslike. We're launching a new division, Emergency Response and Safety Systems. I've been trying to find the right person to run it for months. Someone who understands real risk, real stakes, someone who acts instead of just talking about action. She gestured at Jack. Someone exactly like you. I'm a mechanic, Jack said. I fix cars. I'm not qualified to buy. You're a volunteer firefighter with 6 years of certification. You have management experience running your own business. And today you proved you have the courage and decisiveness we need. Rachel pulled out another card, wrote something on the back, and placed it with the first. This is my personal cell phone. Think about it. When you're ready, call me. Jack's head was spinning, and not just from the concussion. Miss Myers, I appreciate the offer, but nothing. Just think about it. Rachel turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and Jack, your medical bills from today, they're taken care of. What? No, you can't. I can, and I did. The hospital has been instructed to send all bills to my office. Consider it a thank you. She smiled, the first genuine smile Jack had seen from her. You gave me back my daughters. This is the least I can do. And then she was gone, her security detail falling in behind her, leaving Jack staring at 2 business cards and trying to process what had just happened. Did that just happen? Hector asked, breaking the silence. Did a billionaire just offer you a job? I think so, Jack said faintly. Sophie was staring at the cards like they might explode. Dad? What does this mean? What did it mean? Jack's exhausted brain tried to work through it. A job. A real job, with what was probably a real salary. Medical bills paid. A future that didn't involve barely scraping by, month after month. Always one disaster away from losing everything. A chance. I don't know, Soph, Jack said honestly. I really don't know. But as he lay there in the hospital bed, broken ribs aching, burns throbbing, head pounding, Jack Turner allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 3 long years. Hope. The hospital discharged Jack 3 days later, against his protests that he was fine after day 1. The doctors insisted on monitoring his concussion, running tests that all came back normal but cost money Jack didn't want to think about, except Rachel Myers had already paid for everything. That fact sat uncomfortably in Jack's chest, a weight he couldn't quite process. He wasn't used to accepting help, wasn't used to anyone swooping in to fix his problems. Sophie had stayed with Mrs. Chen during those 3 days, their elderly neighbor who'd known Sarah and had a soft spot for Sophie. When Jack finally walked through his front door, moving stiffly, his ribs wrapped tight, his arms bandaged, he found his house transformed. The lawn had been mowed. Someone had fixed the loose board on the porch steps. Inside, the refrigerator was stocked with casseroles and covered dishes, sticky notes attached with names he recognized from around town. The Johnsons, the Patels, the Rodriguez family. Everyone wanted to help, Sophie explained, hovering near him like she was afraid he might collapse. Mrs. Chen organized it. She said heroes deserve to come home to a clean house. Jack didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man with broken ribs who'd gotten lucky, who'd done what anyone with a pulse and a conscience would do. But Sophie was looking at him with such pride, such fierce love, that he just pulled her into a careful hug and said, "That was really nice of them." That first week back was strange. People recognized Jack everywhere he went, at the grocery store, the gas station, even at Sophie's school when he dropped her off. They'd stop him, shake his hand, thank him for what he'd done. The local paper had run a front-page story. Local mechanic saves 15 children from burning bus. They'd used an old photo of Jack from the volunteer fire department, and he looked younger in it, less worn down by life. Hector ran the garage solo while Jack recovered, refusing to accept any argument. Doctor said no heavy lifting for 3 weeks, Hector had said firmly. So you're staying home. I've got this. But staying home meant Jack had time to think. Time to look at those 2 business cards Rachel Myers had left, still sitting on his kitchen counter where he'd placed them after coming home. Time to wonder if the offer had been real or just gratitude talking, something she'd forget about as soon as the adrenaline faded. On the 8th day after the accident, Jack's phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Turner, this is Caroline Fletcher, assistant to Ms. Rachel Myers. The voice was professional, clipped, efficient. Ms. Myers wanted me to follow up regarding her employment offer. Would you be available for a meeting this Friday at 10 a.m. at our Indianapolis headquarters? Jack's heart rate kicked up, so it was real. Yes, I could do that. Excellent. I'll email you the details and arrange for a car to pick you up. A car? No, that's not necessary. I can drive myself. Ms. Myers insists. The address is being sent to your email now. We'll see you Friday, Mr. Turner. She hung up before Jack could protest further. He stared at his phone, feeling like he'd been swept up in a current he couldn't control. A car. A meeting at headquarters. This was real. This was actually happening. Sophie found him still staring at his phone 20 minutes later. Dad? You okay? I have a job interview, Jack said, the words sounding surreal even as he spoke them. Friday, in Indianapolis. Sophie's eyes went wide. With the lady? The one whose kids you saved? Yeah, with Rachel Myers. Are you going to say yes? Sophie climbed onto the chair across from him, swinging her legs. If she offers you a job, I mean? Jack didn't know how to answer that. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to say yes immediately. A stable job with benefits, a real salary, maybe even health insurance that didn't cost half his income. It was everything he'd been struggling toward for 3 years. But it also meant leaving the garage. The garage he'd built, the business that had been his dream, the place where he'd worked alongside Sarah in the early days, where she'd kept the books and answered phones while pregnant with Sophie. Letting it go felt like letting go of her all over again. I don't know, baby, Jack said honestly. It's complicated. Sophie was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful in that way that made her seem older than 8. Mom would want you to be happy, she finally said. She told me that before she died. She said the most important thing was that we were happy. Jack's throat tightened. She said that? Yeah, when you weren't in the room. Sophie's voice got very small. She said sometimes being happy means letting go of things that hurt, even if you love them. The wisdom of it hit Jack like a physical blow. Sarah had known. Of course she'd known. She'd known how hard Jack would struggle to keep the garage running, how he'd hold on to it out of stubbornness and grief rather than practical sense. You're pretty smart, you know that? Jack managed. Sophie grinned, suddenly 8 years old again. I get it from you. Definitely from your mom, Jack corrected, but he was smiling. Friday arrived faster than Jack expected. He wore his only suit, the same one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, now slightly too big because he'd lost weight over the past 3 years. At 9:30 sharp, a black town car pulled up outside his house. Not a limo, thank God, but still nicer than any car Jack had ever been inside that he wasn't fixing. The driver was a professional, older gentleman who made no comment about Jack's obvious discomfort with being driven. The ride to Indianapolis took an hour, and Jack spent most of it staring out the window, watching farmland give way to suburbs, then to the city proper. Myers Industries occupied a sleek glass building in the downtown business district, 15 stories of modern architecture that looked like something from a magazine. Jack felt profoundly out of place as he walked through the lobby, his work-worn hands and weathered face standing out among the young professionals in their expensive suits. Caroline Fletcher met him at reception, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a manner that was simultaneously warm and intimidating. Mr. Turner, welcome. Miss Myers is expecting you. She led him to an elevator, up to the 14th floor, down a hallway with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city. Jack tried not to gawk. Finally, Caroline stopped at a door, knocked once, and opened it. Mr. Turner is here, Ms. Myers. Send him in. Thank you, Caroline. Jack stepped into an office that was bigger than his entire garage. Windows on 2 walls, a massive desk made of dark wood, bookshelves filled with actual books rather than just decorations. And behind the desk, Rachel Myers, looking every inch the CEO in a charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back, her expression professionally neutral. But when she saw Jack, her face softened into a genuine smile. Jack, thank you for coming. She stood, came around the desk to shake his hand. How are you feeling? The ribs healing okay? Getting there, Jack said. Still sore, but better. Good. Sit, please. Rachel gestured to a pair of leather chairs near the window, a coffee table between them, less formal than the desk. Jack appreciated that. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? I'm fine, thank you. They sat, and for a moment there was an awkward silence. Jack got the sense that Rachel was as unsure how to start this conversation as he was. Finally, she leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped. I meant what I said at the hospital, she began. This isn't charity, and it's not just gratitude. Though God knows I'm grateful, I genuinely believe you're the right person for what we're trying to build. I looked up your company, Jack admitted. After you left, you make everything. Manufacturing equipment, tech components, logistics systems. We do. We're diversified, which has its advantages. Rachel smiled slightly. But we've identified a gap in the market, comprehensive emergency response systems. Not just equipment, but training, consultation, rapid response. We want to work with schools, municipalities, corporations, teach them how to prepare for disasters, how to respond, how to save lives. And you want me to run this division? Jack couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Ms. Myers, Rachel, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not qualified. I'm a mechanic who volunteers at the fire station. I don't have a college degree. I've never worked corporate. I don't know anything about... You know what matters. Rachel's voice was firm. You know how to act under pressure. You know how to lead. I spoke to your fire chief, by the way. He said in 6 years, you've been on more calls than anyone. Always volunteer for the tough jobs and keep a cool head when everyone else is panicking. Jack hadn't known Chief Morrison had said those things. The knowledge sat warm in his chest. And you know how to build something from nothing, Rachel continued. You started your garage with a loan and a dream. You've kept it running through a recession, through personal tragedy, through everything life threw at you. That's not easy, Jack. That takes strength and intelligence and determination. It takes desperation, Jack corrected quietly. I kept the garage running because I had no choice, because my daughter needed food and a roof over her head, which makes you exactly the kind of person I want running this division, someone who understands what's at stake, someone who knows that failure isn't an option. Rachel pulled a folder from the coffee table, handed it to Jack. This is the offer. Salary, benefits, everything. Look it over. Think about it. Jack opened the folder and his breath caught. The salary listed was more than 3 times what he made in a good year at the garage. Health insurance, full coverage, dental, vision, the works, a retirement plan, stock options, a company car. This is... Jack couldn't finish the sentence. It's what the position is worth, Rachel said simply. And Jack? The job is yours if you want it. No more interviews, no competition. I've made my decision. Jack stared at the papers, his mind spinning. This would change everything. Sophie could go to a better school, could have the things other kids had. They could move out of the rental, maybe buy a small house. He could stop lying awake at night doing math that didn't add up, stop choosing between fixing his truck and buying groceries. But what about my garage? The question came out before Jack could stop it. Rachel's expression turned sympathetic. That's your decision to make. You could sell it, close it, keep it running with a manager, whatever you want. But Jack, I need to be honest with you. This job is full-time and then some, at least for the first year or two while we're building the division from the ground up. It would be difficult to do both. Jack had known that. Of course he'd known that. But hearing it stated plainly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. Take your time. Rachel stood and Jack did too. But Jack, don't overthink this. Sometimes the right choice is the one that scares us most. They shook hands again, and Caroline appeared to escort Jack back to the lobby. The drive home was a blur. Jack couldn't stop seeing that number, the salary that would solve every problem, open every door. When he got home, Hector was waiting on his porch, 2 beers in hand. He offered one to Jack without a word. They sat on the steps, watching the afternoon sun paint the street gold, and Jack told him everything. So, Hector said when Jack finished, you're taking it, right? I don't know. Jack, Hector turned to look at him. Brother, I love you, but you're an idiot if you don't take this job. The garage is barely breaking even, has been for 2 years. You know it, I know it. Hector's voice was gentle but firm. You've been killing yourself trying to keep it alive, and I get it, man. I do. Sarah loved that place. But she's gone, Jack. She's not coming back. And keeping the garage won't bring her back. Jack flinched. It was the truth, brutal and hard, and Hector was the only person who could say it to him like that. What happens to you if I leave? Jack asked. The garage. We'll be fine. I'll find another job. Hell, maybe I'll buy the place from you if you want to sell. Been thinking about going into business for myself anyway. Hector grinned. Turner and Reyes Auto Repair has a nice ring to it. Reyes and Turner, Jack corrected automatically, and they both laughed. That night, Jack sat with Sophie at the kitchen table. He showed her the offer, explained what it meant. She read through it carefully, her young face serious. That's a lot of money, she said. It is. We could get a house with a yard, and maybe a dog? Despite everything, Jack smiled. Maybe a dog? Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Are you scared? The question surprised him with its perceptiveness. Yeah, Jack admitted. Yeah, I'm scared. Of what? Of failing, of not being good enough, of letting people down. Jack paused. Of letting your mom down. Sophie reached across the table and took his hand, her small fingers squeezing his calloused ones. Dad, you could never let Mom down. She loved you. She thought you were the best person in the world. She was biased, Jack said, his voice rough. She was right. Sophie's green eyes, Sarah's eyes, were fierce. And I think you should take the job. I think you should do something that makes you happy instead of something that makes you sad. The garage doesn't make me sad. Yes, it does. I see your face when you come home. I hear you worrying about money. Sophie's voice cracked slightly. I don't want you to be sad anymore, Dad. I want you to be happy, even if it means letting go. And there it was again. That wisdom beyond her years, that understanding that shouldn't exist in an 8-year-old but did because she'd lost her mother and grown up too fast. Jack pulled his daughter into his arms, held her tight despite his aching ribs. When did you get so smart? I told you. I get it from you. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Jack sat alone in the dark kitchen. He thought about Sarah, about the dreams they'd had, about the life they'd planned. He thought about the garage, about every hour he'd put into it, every car he'd fixed, every customer he'd helped. And he thought about the future, Sophie's future, specifically. The opportunities this job could give her, the stability, the security, the chance at a life where she didn't have to worry about money, didn't have to see her father stressed and exhausted, didn't have to grow up too fast because there was no other choice. Jack picked up his phone, found Rachel Meyer's card, and dialed the number before he could change his mind. She answered on the second ring. Jack? I'll take the job, he said. If the offer's still open, I'll take it. There was a pause, then Rachel's voice came back warm with relief. It's open. Welcome to Myers Industries, Jack. After they hung up, Jack sat for a long time in the silence. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump, unsure if he'd fly or fall. But for Sophie, he'd risk the fall. The next few weeks moved like a freight train. Jack officially accepted the position, signing contracts that made his head spin. He met with lawyers Rachel provided to help him sort out the garage. In the end, Hector did buy it, with financing Rachel arranged through one of Myers Industries' partner banks. The sale price was fair, enough to pay off Jack's debts and put a little in savings. The hardest part was the last day. Jack stood in the garage one final time, the space he'd built with his own hands, where he'd worked beside Sarah, where he'd taught himself to be a businessman even though he'd never planned to be one. The smell of motor oil and metal, the scattered tools, the calendar still showing last month's date. Hector found him there, standing in the middle of the empty bay. You okay, boss? Yeah. Jack's voice was rough. Just saying goodbye. Hey! Hector clapped him on the shoulder. You're not saying goodbye. You're saying, see you later. This place will always be here, and you can come back anytime. Get your hands dirty if you miss it. Hector and Turner Auto Repair, Jack said, and Hector laughed. Damn right. They locked up together, and Jack handed over the keys. As he drove away, he didn't let himself look back in the rearview mirror. Forward. He had to keep looking forward. Myers Industries set Jack up with an office on the 14th floor, 3 doors down from Rachel's. It felt absurd. Jack Turner, mechanic, with his own office, his own assistant, his own parking space. The first day, he showed up in jeans and a button-down shirt, only to find that Rachel had arranged for a corporate wardrobe consultation. By the end of the week, he owned 5 suits and felt ridiculous in all of them. "You look fine," Rachel said, catching him adjusting his tie for the 100th time outside a conference room. Professional, confident. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Jack muttered. "Then fake it until you don't." Rachel smiled. "That's what we all do, Jack. Every single person in this building is faking something. You just fake it better than most because you've actually done real things." The work was overwhelming at first. Jack was tasked with building the emergency response division from nothing. Hire a team, develop training protocols, reach out to potential clients, create a business plan. He'd never done any of it before, but Rachel paired him with experienced people from other divisions, gave him resources, and most importantly, trusted him to figure it out. Jack threw himself into the work with the same determination he'd applied to keeping the garage alive. He studied emergency response systems, took online courses in business management, spent hours on the phone with fire chiefs and school administrators and corporate safety officers. He hired his first employee, a former EMT named Diana, who had a gift for curriculum development. Then a second, a third. By the end of the first month, Jack had a team of 5 in a preliminary training program. By the end of the second month, they'd landed their first client, a school district in southern Indiana that wanted comprehensive emergency training for all their staff. And through it all, Rachel was there. Not hovering, not micromanaging, but available. She'd stop by Jack's office with coffee, ask how things were going, offer advice when he was stuck. They fell into an easy working relationship, professional but warm, built on mutual respect. It was during one of these coffee visits, 6 weeks into Jack's tenure, that Rachel brought up something different. "I wanted to thank you," she said, settling into one of the chairs across from Jack's desk. Jack looked up from the training manual he'd been reviewing. "For what?" "For not making this weird." Rachel gestured vaguely at the office, at the company. "You could have. It would have been easy to let the whole 'I saved your kids' thing color everything, to expect special treatment or to feel like I owe you, but you haven't done that." "You gave me a job," Jack said. "A good job that I'm trying very hard not to screw up. That's payment enough." "That's what I mean. You see this as a job, not a favor. You're earning your place here." Rachel paused, seemed to consider her next words. "Emma and Ellie ask about you, you know. They want to meet you again, properly, when you're not bleeding and concussed." Jack felt his chest tighten. He'd thought about the twins occasionally, wondered how they were doing, if they had nightmares about the crash, if they were okay. But he had deliberately kept his distance, not wanting to intrude on Rachel's family life. "I'd like that," he said. "If you think they're ready." "They're ready. They've been asking since the day after the accident." Rachel smiled. "What about Saturday? You could come to dinner at my house. Bring Sophie. The girls would love to meet her." Jack hesitated. Dinner at his boss's house felt like crossing a line somehow, but Rachel's expression was open, genuine. This wasn't a corporate obligation. This was a mother wanting her daughters to meet the man who'd saved them. "Okay," Jack agreed. "Saturday works." When Jack told Sophie about the dinner invitation, she reacted with a level of excitement that surprised him. She insisted on wearing her best dress, spent an hour that Saturday afternoon making a card for the twins, and peppered Jack with questions during the entire drive to Rachel's house. "What if they don't like me? What if I say something wrong? Dad, what do I talk about with them?" "Sophie, breathe." Jack glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "They're 6 years old. Just be yourself. Talk about kid stuff. You'll be fine." Rachel's house, calling it a house felt like calling the ocean a puddle, was in an exclusive neighborhood north of Indianapolis. The gate required a code. The driveway was circular. The house itself was modern, all glass and clean lines, set back on what had to be several acres. "Whoa," Sophie breathed as they pulled up. "This is where she lives?" "Apparently." Jack felt profoundly out of place again, but he'd learned to push through that feeling. He parked near the front entrance, helped Sophie out, and rang the doorbell. Rachel answered, but not in a business suit. She wore jeans and a casual sweater, her hair down around her shoulders, and she looked more relaxed than Jack had ever seen her. "Jack, Sophie, welcome. Come in, come in." The interior was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, art on the walls, furniture that looked expensive but comfortable. But before Jack could take it all in, two small tornadoes appeared from somewhere deeper in the house. "It's him! It's the brave man!" The twins, Emma and Ellie, though Jack couldn't tell which was which, raced toward him, then stopped suddenly, shy. Rachel laughed. "Girls, you remember Mr. Turner, and this is his daughter, Sophie." One of the twins, the one with a small scar on her chin, stepped forward. "I'm Ellie. You saved me. You cut my backpack and carried me out of the fire." "I remember," Jack said, crouching down to her level. "You were very brave. Both of you were." "I wasn't brave," Ellie said matter-of-factly. "I was scared. But you weren't scared." "Oh, I was definitely scared," Jack admitted. "But sometimes being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared." The other twin, Emma, had approached Sophie, who stood slightly behind Jack. "I like your dress," Emma said. "Is that sparkly?" "A little bit." Sophie touched the fabric self-consciously. "My mom bought it for me, before. Emma's expression turned solemn. "Our first mom died too. We don't remember her much, but Rachel adopted us when we were 3, and she's our mom now." Jack glanced up at Rachel in surprise. She gave him a small, sad smile that explained volumes. "I didn't know," Jack said quietly as the girls led Sophie toward what appeared to be a playroom. "Why would you?" Rachel gestured for Jack to follow her toward the kitchen. "It's not exactly something that comes up in business meetings. But yes, I adopted the girls 3 years ago. Their biological mother, my younger sister, died in childbirth. Their father wasn't in the picture, so I took them in." "That's..." Jack struggled for words. "That's incredible. That's family." Rachel pulled wine glasses from a cabinet. "Red or white?" "Whatever you're having is fine." They moved to the back patio, more like a terrace, overlooking a pool and landscaped gardens. The evening was warm for October, the sun setting in shades of orange and gold. Rachel poured wine, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "I was married once," Rachel said suddenly. "That's how I built the company. My husband and we started it together 15 years ago. He was the engineer, I was the business mind. We were going to change the world." Jack heard the past tense. "What happened?" "He left. 6 years ago, when the company started really taking off. Turned out he couldn't handle me being the CEO, being the face of the business. His ego couldn't take it." Rachel's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jack could hear the old hurt underneath. "Divorced me, married his secretary. Cliché, right? And moved to California. I bought out his shares and kept building. I'm sorry." "Don't be, I'm not." Rachel smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I learned something important, that I was stronger than I thought. That I could do it alone. And then my sister died, and I had Emma and Ellie, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. I had something to build for that mattered more than market share." Jack understood that. He'd felt the same way when Sophie was born, like suddenly everything he did had a point beyond himself. "That's why that night 3 years ago mattered so much," Rachel continued. "When you fixed my car, when you refused payment. I was driving home from burying my father, trying to get back to 2 traumatized 3-year-olds who'd just lost their mother. I was exhausted and heartbroken, and then my car died, and I thought..." She paused, blinking back tears. "I thought that was it. That the universe was telling me I couldn't do it, couldn't handle everything on my plate. And then you showed up. I was just..." "Don't say just doing what anyone would do." Rachel's voice was firm but kind. "Because most people wouldn't. Most people would have said it was too late, too cold, too much trouble. But you didn't. You came out in the middle of the night, fixed my car, and sent me home to my girls. You gave me hope that good people still existed." Jack didn't know what to say to that. He sipped his wine, watched the sun sink lower, and let Rachel's words settle into him. "And now you've done it again," Rachel said softly. "Given me my girls when I almost lost them." Do you understand why I wanted you here? Why I trust you with this division? It's not charity, Jack. It's recognition. You're the kind of person who makes the world better just by being in it. I'm just trying to do right by my daughter, Jack said. That's all I've ever tried to do. Exactly. Rachel clinked her glass against his. That's what makes you perfect for this job. You understand what really matters. Dinner was loud and chaotic in the best way. The twins dominated the conversation, telling elaborate stories about school and their friends and the neighbor's cat who kept trying to sneak into their yard. Sophie, after initial shyness, joined in enthusiastically. Jack and Rachel sat back, letting the kids' energy wash over them, occasionally exchanging amused glances across the table. After dinner, while the girls played in the other room, Rachel walked Jack to his car. The night had turned cool, stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Thank you for coming," Rachel said. "This meant a lot to the girls. To me, too." "Thank you for inviting us." Jack hesitated, then added, "Sophie hasn't been this happy in a while. Since her mom died, she's been quieter, more serious. But tonight she was just a kid again. Bring her back anytime. Emma and Ellie could use a friend, and honestly, so could I." Rachel smiled. "It gets lonely being a single parent. Even with all this," she gestured at the house, the grounds, the life she'd built. "Yeah," Jack agreed quietly. "It really does." They stood there for a moment, two people who'd found each other through tragedy and circumstance, building something that felt like the beginning of a real friendship. "See you Monday?" Rachel asked. "Bright and early." Jack opened his car door, called for Sophie. She came running, hugged all three Myers girls goodbye, and climbed into the car, chattering about everything they'd done. As Jack drove home, Sophie eventually fell quiet, staring out the window at the passing lights. Then, softly, she said, "I like them, Dad. Rachel and the girls. They're nice." "Yeah," Jack agreed. "They are." "Do you think Mom would like them too?" The question surprised Jack, but he considered it seriously. Sarah had always been a good judge of character, had valued kindness and authenticity above everything else. "Yeah, baby, I think she would." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching the night roll by. And Jack, driving through the darkness toward home, felt something he hadn't felt in 3 long years, like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. The following Monday morning, Jack arrived at Myers Industries to find a crisis waiting on his desk. Diana, his lead trainer, was already in his office when he walked in, her usually calm face tight with stress. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Lincoln Elementary just called. They want to cancel the training contract." Jack set down his coffee, his good mood from the weekend evaporating. "What? Why? We're supposed to start their staff training next week." Their superintendent got cold feet, said the school board is questioning whether they need this level of emergency preparedness. They're worried about scaring the kids, and apparently some parents are upset about the whole thing. Diana handed him a printed email. "They want out of the contract." Jack scanned the email, his jaw tightening. Lincoln Elementary was their first major client, a district with 8 schools, over 3,000 students. Losing them would be a disaster, not just financially, but for the division's credibility. If their first client walked away, others would question whether Turner Emergency Services was worth the investment. "Get me Superintendent Wallace on the phone," Jack said, "and pull up everything we have on their current safety protocols. I need to know what they're working with now." Diana nodded and disappeared. Jack dropped into his chair, running both hands through his hair. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of when he took the job, that he wouldn't be good enough, wouldn't know how to handle the corporate side of things, would let Rachel down. 20 minutes later, Jack was on a video call with Superintendent Martha Wallace, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and argument in existence. "Mr. Turner," she said coolly, "I appreciate you reaching out, but our decision is final. The board met Friday evening, and the consensus was that your services, while well-intentioned, are simply not necessary at this time. With all due respect, Superintendent Wallace, I disagree." Jack kept his voice steady, professional. "And I'd like to show you why. Can you give me 15 minutes? Just 15 minutes to walk you through what we're offering and why it matters." Wallace hesitated, then sighed. 15 minutes, Mr. Turner, but I'm not making any promises." Jack pulled up the presentation he and Diana had been refining for weeks. But instead of starting with statistics and training modules, he started with the truth. 3 months ago, I pulled 15 kids off a burning school bus, he said. You probably saw it on the news. What you didn't see was what happened in the minutes before I got there. The bus driver had a seizure, the vehicle rolled, and for almost 90 seconds, those kids were trapped with no one knowing what to do. Wallace's expression shifted slightly, attentive now. The bus monitor, a good woman, been doing the job for 10 years. She froze, Jack continued. Not because she was a coward or incompetent, but because she'd never been trained for that scenario. She didn't know how to use the emergency exits, didn't know how to coordinate an evacuation under duress, didn't know how to keep kids calm when they were terrified. So she froze, and those kids stayed trapped until I happened to drive by. He pulled up a photo. One of the twins, Emma, in her hospital bed afterward, smiling despite the oxygen tubes. This is Emma Myers, 6 years old. She's alive because I got lucky. But what about the next time? What about when there's no volunteer firefighter driving by? What about when it's a different emergency, a fire drill that becomes real, an intruder, a medical crisis? We have protocols, Wallace said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. You have paper, Jack corrected gently. Binders full of procedures that staff have maybe read once, years ago. What you don't have is muscle memory. You don't have people who've practiced enough that when their brains shut down from fear, their bodies know what to do anyway. He pulled up their training curriculum. What we're offering isn't scary. It's not going to traumatize kids or make parents nervous. It's practical, hands-on training for your staff. Emergency exits, where they are, how to open them, how to use them efficiently. Medical response, how to handle everything from an asthma attack to a severe injury. Crisis communication, how to keep kids calm, how to coordinate with first responders, how to make sure everyone gets home safe. Wallace was leaning forward now, studying the screen. Jack pressed his advantage. We're not talking about active shooter drills or worst-case scenarios. We're talking about the everyday emergencies that happen in schools all the time. Last year alone, how many kids in your district went to the hospital from school? How many allergic reactions, injuries, medical incidents? I'd have to check the exact number, Wallace admitted. But it's high. We have over 3,000 students, and every single one of those incidents is a moment when trained staff can make the difference between a minor problem and a tragedy. Jack pulled up testimonials from fire chiefs and EMTs he'd interviewed. Your current protocols assume emergency services will arrive quickly, but in rural areas, response times can be 15, 20 minutes. That's 15 minutes when your staff are the only help those kids have. Wallace was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she said, What about the parents? Some of them are concerned this will frighten their children. Then let me present to the Parent Association, Jack said immediately. Let me show them exactly what we're doing and why. Let them ask questions, voice concerns. If after that presentation they still don't want the training, I'll walk away, no hard feelings, and we'll void the contract with no penalty to your district. You'd do that? I would, because this isn't about the money for me, Superintendent Wallace. It's about making sure what happened on that bus doesn't happen again. It's about making sure every kid goes home safe at the end of the day. Jack paused. I have an 8-year-old daughter. She goes to Riverside Academy. If she were in your district, I'd want her teachers trained. I'd want to know that if something happened, the adults around her knew what to do. Wallace's expression softened completely. You have a daughter? Sophie, she's my whole world. Jack pulled up a photo. Sophie on her first day of 3rd grade, backpack almost as big as she was, grinning at the camera. And every parent in your district feels the same way about their kids. This training isn't about fear. It's about love. It's about doing everything we can to protect the people who matter most. Another long silence. Then Wallace nodded slowly. Thursday evening, 7 p.m. I'll arrange for the Parent Association to meet in the Lincoln Elementary cafeteria. You'll have an hour to present. Fair? More than fair. Thank you, Superintendent Wallace. After the call ended, Jack sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. Diana appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised in question. We've got a shot, Jack said. Thursday night, parent presentation. You're going to do great, Diana smiled. That thing you said about muscle memory, about bodies knowing what to do when brains shut down, that was perfect. Yeah, well, let's hope the parents think so too. That evening, Jack stayed late at the office, refining his presentation. He wanted it perfect, wanted to strike the right balance between informative and reassuring, between highlighting risks and offering solutions. Around 8 p.m., there was a knock on his door. Rachel stood there, still in her work clothes, but with her jacket off, looking tired. "Burning the midnight oil?" she asked. Jack gestured at his computer screen. "Lincoln Elementary. I've got a parent presentation Thursday. If it goes badly, we lose the contract and probably our credibility with every other school district we're trying to land." "I heard." Rachel stepped into the office, closed the door behind her. "I also heard you talked Wallace off the ledge this morning. She called me personally to say she was impressed with your passion." "Passion's easy. Results are what matter." "Jack." Rachel sat in the chair across from his desk. "You need to give yourself more credit. You've been here less than 3 months, and you've built an entire division from scratch. You've hired a solid team, developed training that's actually innovative, and landed a major client. Most people couldn't do that in a year." "Most people aren't as desperate to prove they belong," Jack said, then immediately regretted the honesty. But Rachel didn't look surprised or judgmental. She just nodded. "I know that feeling. When I took over as CEO, I was 31 years old, a woman in a male-dominated industry trying to run a company that half the board thought should have gone to my ex-husband. I spent years feeling like an imposter, waiting for someone to realize I didn't belong in that office. What changed? I stopped waiting for permission to believe in myself. I looked at the results, the company growing, the employees we'd hired, the products we'd developed, and I let the evidence speak for itself." Rachel leaned forward. "You're doing the same thing, Jack. You're building something real, something that matters. Stop waiting for permission to be proud of that." Jack wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways he was still learning, still fumbling, still unsure. But Rachel's expression was so earnest, so certain, that he just nodded. "I'll try." "Good." Rachel stood. "Now go home. It's late, and Sophie's probably wondering where you are." She was right. Jack packed up his laptop and headed out. The drive home through Indianapolis's evening traffic gave him time to think about Rachel's words. Maybe she was right. Maybe he needed to stop viewing himself through the lens of everything he wasn't. Not a college graduate, not a corporate executive, not someone who belonged in a glass tower, and start seeing himself through the lens of what he was. A father, a firefighter, someone who showed up when it mattered. When he got home, he found Sophie at the kitchen table, surrounded by homework. She looked up when he walked in, her face brightening. "Dad, you're home!" "Sorry I'm late, baby. Work ran over." Jack dropped his keys on the counter, loosened his tie. "How was your day?" "Good. We started reading Charlotte's Web in class, and Mrs. Patterson says I'm doing really well with my reading comprehension." Sophie gathered her papers. "And Emma and Ellie sent me a video message. Look!" She held up her tablet. Jack had bought it for her birthday last year, an extravagance he couldn't quite afford but couldn't quite resist, and played a video. The twins appeared on screen, identical grins, talking over each other about a game they wanted Sophie to play with them this weekend. "Rachel invited us over again," Sophie said. "Can we go? Please?" Jack thought about his Thursday presentation, about the work that would pile up, about all the reasons he should say no. Then he thought about Sarah's words, filtered through Sophie. "The most important thing is that we're happy." "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we can go." Sophie squealed and hugged him, and Jack held her tight, feeling the weight of the day finally lift. Thursday evening arrived too quickly. Jack drove to Lincoln Elementary with Diana beside him, both of them reviewing the presentation one last time. The school was a single-story brick building on the edge of town, surrounded by cornfields and a playground that had seen better days. Cars filled the parking lot. Apparently word had spread about the meeting, and parents were showing up in force. "Big crowd," Diana observed. "That's good, right?" "That's terrifying," Jack corrected, but he smiled to show he was joking, mostly joking. They set up in the cafeteria, rows of folding chairs facing a projector screen, the smell of institutional food lingering in the air. Superintendent Wallace met them at the door, looking anxious. "We've got about 90 parents coming," she said. "The school board is here too in the back row, And fair warning, Mr. Turner, there are some vocal critics in the crowd. Parents who think this is government overreach or unnecessary fear-mongering. Noted. Jack straightened his tie, feeling the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. We'll handle it. The cafeteria filled quickly. Jack recognized the type. Working families, farmers, small business owners. People who loved their kids fiercely and didn't trust outsiders telling them what to do. This would be a tough crowd. Superintendent Wallace called the meeting to order, gave a brief introduction, and then turned it over to Jack. He stepped to the front of the room, feeling 90 pairs of eyes on him, and took a breath. My name is Jack Turner, he began. 3 months ago, I pulled 15 children off a burning school bus. Some of you probably saw it on the news. What you didn't see was the 90 seconds before I got there. 90 seconds when those kids were trapped because the adults around them didn't know what to do. He had their attention. The room had gone completely quiet. I'm not here to scare you, Jack continued. And I'm not here to sell you something you don't need. I'm here because I'm a father, just like many of you. My daughter is 8 years old. Her name is Sophie. And every morning when I drop her at school, I trust that the people taking care of her know how to keep her safe. Not just on a normal day, on the worst day. He clicked to the first slide, a photo of a school bus, not burning, but normal, full of kids on their way home. This is what we all see every day. Safe, routine, nothing to worry about. But inside every routine is the potential for crisis. A medical emergency, a fire, an accident. And when that crisis happens, we have two choices. We can hope the adults in charge will figure it out in the moment, or we can make sure they're trained before the moment ever arrives. Jack walked them through the basics, what the training covered, how it worked, why it mattered. He showed statistics on school emergencies, response times in rural areas, outcomes with and without trained staff. But he kept coming back to the human element, to stories instead of numbers. Last year in Michigan, a third grader went into anaphylactic shock from a bee sting on the playground, Jack said. The school had an EpiPen, but none of the staff on duty that day had been trained to use it. They called 911 and waited. By the time paramedics arrived, the child had stopped breathing. He survived, but he was in the hospital for a week, and he'll have neurological issues for the rest of his life. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Jack pressed on. 2 years ago in Ohio, a fire started in a middle school science lab. The alarm went off, but in the chaos of evacuation, a special needs student got separated from his aide. Staff didn't realize he was missing until they were outside. He hid in a bathroom, terrified of the noise and confusion. Firefighters found him unconscious from smoke inhalation. He died 3 days later. This is exactly what I was afraid of, a voice called out from the back. A man stood, 30s, wearing a feed store cap, arms crossed defensively. You're trying to terrify us into buying your services. No, Jack said calmly. I'm telling you the truth. These things happen. Not often, thank God, but they do happen. And when they do, training makes the difference between a scary story and a tragedy. My kids are fine, the man insisted. Schools have been running for 100 years without this kind of thing. You're right, they have. Jack nodded. And for 100 years, kids have died in preventable accidents because adults didn't know what to do. We wear seatbelts now because we learned they save lives. We have fire extinguishers because we learned they prevent disasters. This is the same thing, learning from past tragedies to prevent future ones. Another parent stood, a woman this time, younger, holding a toddler on her hip. My daughter is in kindergarten here. She's already anxious about being away from me. If you start drilling them on emergencies, won't that make it worse? That's a fair concern, Jack said, and that's why we don't drill the kids. We train the staff. Your daughter won't know anything is different except that her teachers are more confident, more prepared. Kids pick up on adult anxiety. If the adults are calm and trained, kids feel safer, not more scared. He clicked to a new slide, photos from a training session Diana had run last week with Myers Industries' internal security team. This is what our training looks like. It's practical, hands-on, focused on real scenarios. We're not teaching combat tactics or worst-case disasters. We're teaching how to use a fire extinguisher, how to perform CPR, how to coordinate an evacuation, how to communicate with emergency services. Basic skills that can save lives. And how much is this costing us? Another voice called out. The district's already broke. We can't afford fancy consultants. Superintendent Wallace stood. The cost is covered by a state safety grant that we've already been awarded. This training won't cost the district or taxpayers a single additional dollar. That shifted the mood in the room. Mutters of conversation, some nodding heads. Jack seized the moment. Look, I get it. You don't know me. You don't know if this is legitimate or just another person trying to profit off fear. So let me tell you who I am. Jack turned off the projector, stepped forward so nothing was between him and the crowd. I grew up in Riverside, 30 miles from here. Went to public schools just like your kids. My dad worked construction. My mom was a nurse. I became a mechanic because I liked working with my hands. Married my high school sweetheart, had a daughter, built a small business. He paused, the words catching in his throat. 3 years ago, my wife died of cancer. Left me with a little girl in a garage I could barely keep running. I was broke, exhausted, and barely holding it together. But I kept showing up because that's what you do when you're a parent. You show up. The room was silent now, completely focused on him. Answered questions. Diana demonstrated some of the training techniques, and by the end, even some of the skeptics were nodding along. When Superintendent Wallace called for a show of hands, who supported moving forward with the training, over 3/4 of the room raised their hands. Motion carries, Wallace said, looking relieved. Mr. Turner, it looks like we're moving forward with your program. Jack felt the tension drain from his shoulders, replaced by exhausted relief. They'd done it. They'd saved the contract and, more importantly, made a real case for why this work mattered. After the meeting, parents came up to shake Jack's hand, to thank him, to share their own stories of emergencies and close calls. The man in the feed store cap, Tom, his name turned out to be, approached last, looking embarrassed. I was rough on you earlier, Tom said, but I heard what you said about your wife, and I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Lost my brother in a farm accident a few years back. Probably wouldn't have happened if someone had known proper safety protocols. I'm sorry for your loss, Jack said, shaking his hand, and thank you for keeping me honest. We need questions like yours to make sure we're doing this right. Tom nodded, satisfied, and left. Diana appeared at Jack's elbow, grinning. Boss, you were incredible. I've never seen someone win over a hostile crowd like that. It wasn't hostile, they were just protective of their kids. Can't fault them for that. Still, you did good. They packed up and drove back to Indianapolis, Diana chattering about how they should incorporate elements of tonight's presentation into their standard pitch. Jack listened with half his attention, the other half already thinking about Sophie, about getting home, about the weekend ahead. When he finally walked through his front door at 10:30, he found Sophie asleep on the couch, a book on her chest. Mrs. Chen sat in the armchair, knitting. She insisted on waiting up for you, Mrs. Chen said softly. Made it to 9 before she crashed. Thank you for staying with her. Jack pulled out his wallet, but Mrs. Chen waved him off. Put that away. After what you did, pulling those children from the bus, you think I'd charge you for watching your daughter? She gathered her knitting. That sweet girl is welcome here anytime. After Mrs. Chen left, Jack carefully lifted Sophie, carried her to her room, and tucked her into bed. She stirred slightly, mumbled, Dad? I'm here, baby. Go back to sleep. Did it go okay? The meeting? It went great. We're moving forward with the training. Sophie smiled without opening her eyes. Mom would be proud. Jack's throat tightened. Yeah, she would be. He kissed her forehead, turned off the light, and headed to his own room. But instead of going straight to bed, he sat on the edge and pulled out his phone, found Rachel's number and sent a text. Lincoln Elementary is a go. Thanks for believing I could do this. Her response came within seconds. Never doubted it for a moment. Congratulations, Jack. You're changing lives. Jack set his phone aside, feeling something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. It had been a long time since he'd felt that way. Since before Sarah got sick, probably. Since before life became about just surviving instead of actually living. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for permission to believe in himself. Maybe it was time to accept that he'd earned his place here, that he deserved the good things happening, that he was allowed to be proud of what he was building. The weekend brought another dinner at Rachel's house, this time with Jack bringing steaks to grill and Rachel providing everything else. The girls played in the pool while Jack manned the grill and Rachel brought out salad and sides. It felt domestic, comfortable, like something they'd been doing for years instead of weeks. "Sophie's been asking if we can get a pool," Jack said, flipping a steak. "I told her maybe someday when we have a yard bigger than a postage stamp." "You're still in the rental?" Rachel handed him a beer. "Jack, with your salary, you could buy a house, a nice one." "I know, I'm just—" Jack paused, trying to find the words. "It's the house we brought Sophie home to from the hospital, the house where Sarah lived. Moving feels like leaving her behind." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? When my sister died, I kept her apartment for 2 years. Paid rent on a place I never visited, just couldn't let it go. It had all her things, all these pieces of who she was, and I thought if I got rid of it, I'd be erasing her." "What changed?" "Emma asked me why her mom didn't have any pictures in our house, and I realized I'd been so busy preserving a shrine no one visited that I'd forgotten to keep her memory alive where it mattered, with her daughters." Rachel met his eyes. "Moving doesn't mean forgetting, Jack. It means making room for new memories while honoring the old ones." Jack absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. "Is it that obvious I'm stuck?" "You're not stuck. You're healing. There's a difference." Rachel smiled gently. "But maybe it's time for the next step in that healing." Before Jack could respond, Sophie's voice rang out. "Dad, come swim with us." "I didn't bring—" Jack started. "Pool house has spare suits in every size," Rachel interrupted. "Go, have fun. The steaks can wait." So Jack found himself in borrowed swim trunks, jumping into the pool with 4 shrieking girls, playing Marco Polo and having chicken fights and forgetting, for a little while, about everything except the simple joy of being present. Sophie rode on his shoulders, laughing harder than he'd heard her laugh in months, and when he caught Rachel's eye across the pool, she was smiling at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, but that made something warm bloom in his chest. Later, after dinner, after the girls had exhausted themselves and were watching a movie inside, Jack and Rachel sat by the pool as the sun set. The evening had turned cool enough that Rachel had draped a blanket over her shoulders. "Thank you for this," Jack said. "For including us. It means a lot to Sophie. To me, too." "You don't have to thank me. I like having you here." Rachel hesitated, then added, "I like having friends who understand what it's like to be a single parent, to build something from nothing, to keep going when you want to quit." "Is that what we are? Friends?" "I hope so." Rachel looked at him directly. "Unless you only see me as your boss, in which case we should probably establish some boundaries." Jack considered this. Their relationship had evolved beyond simple employer-employee weeks ago. They had coffee together most mornings, talked about things that had nothing to do with work, shared pieces of their lives that went deeper than professional courtesy. And moments like this, sitting by the pool, talking in the gathering dark, felt like something more than business networking. "No," he said, "you're not just my boss. You're a friend, a good one." Rachel's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. "Good, because I could use more of those." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Jack thought about what Rachel had said earlier about moving, about making room for new memories. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop clinging to a house that held as much pain as it did love. Maybe it was time to build something new. "I think I'm going to start looking at houses," he said suddenly. "Nothing huge, but something with a yard. Maybe room for that dog Sophie keeps asking about." Rachel turned to him, eyebrows raised. "Yeah? Yeah, you're right. Moving doesn't mean forgetting, and Sophie deserves a fresh start. Hell, maybe I do too. I know a good realtor. I'll send you her information." "Of course you do," Jack said, but he was smiling. The following weeks blurred together in the best way possible. Jack's division continued to grow. They landed 2 more school districts and started preliminary talks with a hospital network about staff training. Diana hired 2 additional trainers, both former first responders with teaching experience. The office that had felt too big 3 months ago now felt almost cramped with activity and purpose. Jack started house hunting, and to his surprise, Sophie embraced it enthusiastically. They looked at places every weekend, Sophie taking notes in a little notebook about which ones had the best yards, which ones had big enough kitchens, which ones felt like home. Rachel's realtor was patient with them, never pushy, understanding that this was about more than square footage and school districts. They found it on a Saturday in early November, a 3-bedroom craftsman on the edge of town, with a fenced yard and an oak tree perfect for a tire swing. It needed work. The kitchen was outdated, the bathroom needed updating, but the bones were solid and the price was right. Sophie walked through it once, climbed the stairs to what would be her room, looked out the window at the yard and turned to Jack with shining eyes. "This one, Dad. This is the one." Jack felt it too. Something about the house just felt right, like it was waiting for them, like it could be home. He made an offer that afternoon. It was accepted 2 days later. "We're really doing this," Jack said to Sophie that night as they celebrated with pizza. "We're moving." Sophie was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Can we bring Mom's things? Her photos, and the quilt she made, and her books?" "Of course, baby. We're bringing all of it. Mom's a part of our family, and she'll be part of our new home, too." Sophie nodded, satisfied. Then she grinned. "And can we get a dog now?" Jack laughed, the sound surprising him with its ease. "Yeah, Soph, we can get a dog." The closing took 3 weeks. During that time, Jack found himself at Myers Industries late one evening, going over contracts for the hospital training program. Rachel appeared in his doorway around 8, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him one. "You're a mind reader." Jack accepted the coffee gratefully. "What are you still doing here?" "Same as you. Too much work, too little time." Rachel settled into the chair across from his desk. "What about the house? Congratulations." "Thanks. We close next Friday. Sophie's already planning where every piece of furniture is going." "That's wonderful, Jack, really." Rachel paused, seemed to be considering something. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Are you happy?" "I know that's a loaded question, but I mean, here, with the job, with everything, are you happy?" Jack thought about it honestly. 3 months ago, he'd been barely surviving, held together by duct tape and stubbornness. Now he had a job he was good at, work that mattered, financial security for the first time in years, and a future that held possibility instead of just obligation. "Yeah," he said, surprised by how true it felt. "Yeah, I think I am. Or getting there, anyway." Rachel's smile was warm, almost proud. "Good. You deserve it. So do you. Are you? Happy?" "Getting there," Rachel echoed his words back. "For a long time after my divorce, after taking in the girls, I felt like I was just managing crises, building the company, raising kids, trying not to fall apart. But lately," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "Lately, it feels like I'm actually living again instead of just surviving. And I think you're part of that." "Me?" "You and Sophie, having you in our lives, watching the girls become friends, building this division together." Rachel met his eyes. "It's reminded me that good people exist, that kindness matters, that it's possible to start over and build something real." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Jack couldn't quite name. Not romance, neither of them was ready for that, might never be ready. But connection, understanding, the recognition of 2 people who'd been through hell and found each other on the other side. "Thank you," Jack said quietly, "for taking a chance on me, for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. Thank you for proving me right." Rachel stood, and the moment passed into something easier, lighter. "Now go home. It's late, and Sophie's probably wondering where you are." Jack packed up, said goodnight, and headed home through the dark city streets. And as he drove, he thought about the past 3 months, about how much had changed, about the life he was building piece by piece from the rubble of what he'd lost. Sarah would be proud, he thought, of the job, of the house, of the way he was raising Sophie, of the fact that he hadn't given up, hadn't let grief consume him, had found a way to keep moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to be proud of himself too. The moving day arrived cold and gray, the kind of November morning that threatened snow but couldn't quite commit. Jack stood in the empty living room of the rental house, the walls showing pale rectangles where pictures had hung, the floors echoing with each footstep. 3 years of his life packed into boxes, loaded into a truck that Hector had volunteered to drive. Sophie wandered through the rooms one last time, her footsteps soft, her expression thoughtful. Jack watched her from the doorway, knowing she was saying her own private goodbyes. This was the only home she really remembered, the house where her mother had read her bedtime stories, where they'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where Sarah had taken her last breath in the bedroom upstairs. "You okay, baby?" Jack asked. Sophie turned to him, and Jack was struck by how much older she looked than she had just a few months ago. Not physically, she was still small for 8, but something in her eyes, in the set of her shoulders. She'd grown up in this house, but she was ready to grow beyond it. "I'm okay," she said. "It's weird, though, saying goodbye?" "Yeah, it is." "Do you think Mom knows that we're moving?" Jack crossed the room, knelt down so he was eye level with his daughter. "I think if she's anywhere, she knows. And I think she'd be happy for us. Excited, even. She'd probably tell us to make sure we measure before we buy furniture," Sophie said, and Jack laughed because that was exactly what Sarah would have said. Practical to the end, his wife. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. "Come on," Jack said, standing and offering his hand. "Let's go see our new home." The Craftsman house looked even better in the gray morning light, solid and welcoming despite needing paint and repairs. The moving truck was already there, and Hector had recruited a crew from the garage, his employees now, but still Jack's friends, to help unload. Mrs. Chen had come too, armed with sandwiches and coffee, directing traffic from the front porch like a tiny general. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Jack told Sophie. "Why don't you go tell the guys where to put your furniture?" Sophie took off running, full of 8-year-old energy, shouting instructions about where her bed should go and which wall needed her bookshelf. Jack followed more slowly, stopping in the doorway of what would be his room. It was bigger than the bedroom in the rental, with windows that let in real light. He could picture it furnished, lived in, becoming a space that was his instead of just the place where he slept. "Big step, boss." Hector appeared beside him, carrying a box labeled kitchen. "How you feeling?" "Terrified," Jack admitted. "And good. Mostly good." "Sarah would have loved this place," Hector said quietly. "The yard especially. She always talked about wanting a garden." Jack nodded, his throat tight. Hector had known Sarah well, had worked for Jack since before she got sick, had been at the funeral. He was one of the few people who could mention her name without Jack feeling like he was being handled with kid gloves. "I'm thinking about putting in raised beds in the spring," Jack said. "Vegetables, maybe some flowers. Sophie could help." "She'd like that." Hector clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, these boxes aren't going to unpack themselves." They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, transforming the empty house into something that resembled a home. Furniture found its place. Boxes were opened and emptied. Sophie's room came together first, her bed with its purple comforter, her bookshelf overflowing, the drawings she'd made covering one wall. Jack's room took longer, partly because he kept getting distracted by other tasks, partly because he wasn't quite sure what he wanted it to be. Around 3 o'clock, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Jack looked up from the box he was unpacking, his clothes wrinkled from storage, and saw Rachel climbing out, followed by the twins. All 3 of them carried packages. "We brought a housewarming gift," Rachel called, climbing the porch steps, and the girls insisted on helping. "Rachel, you didn't have to," Jack started. "I know, I wanted to." Rachel handed him one of the packages, heavy, wrapped in brown paper. "This is from all of us." Sophie appeared from inside, her face lighting up when she saw Emma and Ellie. "You came! We wanted to see your new house." Emma grabbed Sophie's hand. "Can you show us your room?" The 3 girls disappeared upstairs in a flurry of giggles and footsteps. Rachel watched them go, smiling. "They've been talking about this all week. You'd think they were the ones moving." Jack unwrapped the package, and his breath caught. It was a framed photograph, the one from the newspaper, taken the day after the bus accident. Jack in his hospital bed, Sophie beside him, both of them looking tired but alive. But Rachel had had it professionally printed and framed, and across the bottom someone had written in elegant script, "Heroes are made in moments, but their impact lasts forever." "Rachel, this is—" Jack couldn't find the words. "Too much?" Rachel's expression was uncertain. "I thought maybe you could hang it somewhere, a reminder of where this all started." "It's perfect." Jack met her eyes. Thank you. The other packages contained practical things: towels, kitchen supplies, a welcome mat with home written across it in cheerful letters. But it was the photograph Jack kept coming back to, kept looking at as the afternoon wore on. A moment captured in time, the fulcrum point where his life had pivoted from barely surviving to actually living. By evening, the moving truck was empty and most of the essential boxes were unpacked. The house looked lived in, comfortable, like it had been waiting for them all along. Mrs. Chen had left food, casseroles and pasta dishes, enough to last them the first few days. Hector and his crew had headed out, tired and satisfied. Only Rachel and the twins remained, the girls still playing upstairs with Sophie. "I should get them home," Rachel said, but she made no move to leave. She stood in Jack's living room, looking around at the space they'd created. "It looks good, Jack. Really good." "Thanks to everyone's help." Jack handed her a beer from the six-pack Hector had left behind. "I couldn't have done this without—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the house, the job, everything. "Without you. Without all of it." Rachel accepted the beer, twisted off the cap. "You give me too much credit. You did the hard work. You gave me the opportunity. You earned it." Rachel took a sip, then added, "Can I tell you something? That day at the crash, when I saw you pull Ellie out of the bus right before it exploded, I thought I was watching you die. I thought I was going to lose both of them and you. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself that if you survived, if you made it out, I'd find a way to thank you, to repay what you'd done. You didn't owe me—" "Let me finish." Rachel's voice was firm but kind. "I know you don't think I owe you anything. You've made that clear, but here's the thing. I didn't give you this job out of obligation. I gave it to you because after I made that promise, I spent weeks trying to figure out who you were. I called people, asked around, learned about your life, about Sarah, about the garage, about how you were barely holding on but never complained, never asked for help, just kept showing up." Jack felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't expected. No one had ever looked at his life that closely, had seen through the mask he wore to the struggle underneath. "And I realized," Rachel continued, "that you were exactly the person I needed. Not because you saved my daughters, though God knows I'll never forget that, but because you understand what matters. You understand that showing up is sometimes the hardest and most important thing you can do, and that's what this division needs. That's what I needed." The words settled between them, honest and raw. Jack took a long pull from his beer, buying time to compose himself. "I'm glad you found me then, even if it took a burning bus to make it happen." Rachel laughed, the tension breaking. "Not the introduction I would have chosen, but I'll take it." Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Sophie appeared, followed by the twins, all three of them talking at once about the tire swing Jack had promised to install, and the puppy they were definitely going to get, and a million other plans for the house and yard. "Can we come back this weekend?" Ellie asked, tugging on Rachel's sleeve. "Sophie said her dad's going to the animal shelter to look at dogs." Rachel raised her eyebrows at Jack. "Is he now?" "Apparently," Jack said, caught between amusement and exasperation, "though I don't remember committing to this weekend specifically." "Please." All three girls turned to him with identical, pleading expressions. It was like being hit by a tsunami of hope and big eyes. "Fine," Jack relented. "Saturday afternoon, but I'm not promising we're bringing a dog home that day. We're just looking." The girls cheered and Rachel mouthed "good luck with that" over their heads. Jack knew he was doomed. One visit to the shelter and Sophie would find a dog that needed them, and he'd cave like he always did when it came to his daughter. But maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time to add more life to their lives, to fill the house with noise and chaos and love. After Rachel and the twins left, Jack and Sophie ate leftover casserole sitting on the floor of the living room because the dining table wasn't set up yet. They talked about school and Sophie's friends and what color they should paint her room. Normal things, easy things, the kind of conversation Jack had missed during the years when everything was hard and heavy. "Dad?" Sophie asked as they were cleaning up. "Are you happy we moved?" "Yeah, baby, I really am." "Me too." Sophie carried her plate to the kitchen, then turned back. "I think Mom would like it here. It feels like a place where happy things could happen." Jack's chest tightened with love for this wise, wonderful little girl. "I think you're right." That night, Jack lay in bed in his new room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around him. Different creaks and groans than the rental, different patterns of light through the windows. It should have felt strange, but instead it felt like possibility, like a blank page waiting to be written on. His phone buzzed, a text from Rachel. "The girls can't stop talking about the new house. Thanks for including them in your big day." Jack typed back, "Thanks for being part of it. Means more than you know." He set the phone aside and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, he fell asleep quickly, deeply, without the weight of worry pressing down on his chest. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Jack's division continued to grow. They landed the hospital network contract, added 2 more school districts, and started preliminary talks with a manufacturing company about workplace safety training. The team expanded to 10 people, all of them good, all of them dedicated to the work. Jack found himself actually enjoying the management side of things, the challenge of building something from nothing and watching it take shape. The house became home gradually, in small increments. Jack painted Sophie's room the pale purple she'd chosen. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom, replaced the outdated light fixtures in the kitchen, started planting the spring garden. On weekends, he worked on the yard, raking leaves, trimming bushes, installing that tire swing under the oak tree. Normal things, dad things, things he'd been too stressed and exhausted to do at the rental. And true to his word, they went to the animal shelter that Saturday. Jack had braced himself for the onslaught of puppy eyes and wagging tails, had prepared his defenses for why they should wait, why they should think about it more carefully. But then Sophie had found Max, a 3-year-old mixed breed with scruffy brown fur and one ear that flopped while the other stood up. The dog had been at the shelter for 6 months, the volunteer explained, because people wanted puppies, not adult dogs with uncertain pedigrees. Max had walked right up to Sophie, sat down at her feet, and looked up at her with an expression that clearly said, "I've been waiting for you." And that was that. They brought Max home that afternoon, along with a bed and toys and enough supplies to stock a pet store. "He's perfect," Sophie declared, watching Max explore the backyard with cautious optimism. "He's exactly what we needed." And she was right. Max brought an energy to the house that had been missing, a sense of life and warmth that filled the empty spaces. He followed Sophie everywhere, slept at the foot of her bed, and greeted Jack at the door every evening with enthusiastic tail wags. It was like the final piece of their new life clicking into place. Rachel and the twins came over regularly, and the girls would play in the yard with Max while the adults sat on the porch, talking about work and life and everything in between. Jack learned that Rachel played piano, that she'd wanted to be a concert pianist as a girl before pragmatism and her father's expectations steered her toward business. He learned that she'd been working 16-hour days for years, building Myers Industries into what it was, barely taking time for herself. "I'm trying to do better about that," Rachel admitted one evening in mid-December. They were on Jack's porch, bundled in coats, watching the first real snow of the season fall. The girls were inside making hot chocolate with more marshmallows than liquid. Work-life balance, actual hobbies, being present instead of just busy. "How's that going?" Jack asked. "It's going," Rachel smiled. "Having friends outside work helps. Having a reason to leave the office at a reasonable hour. Glad I could provide that reason." "You have no idea." Rachel turned to him, her expression serious. "Before you came along, before the accident, I was drowning. I didn't even realize how much I'd let work consume me until I had something, someone, to pull me back." Jack didn't know what to say to that. The idea that he'd somehow saved Rachel the way she'd saved him felt too big, too circular. But maybe that was how it worked. Maybe we all saved each other in small ways, just by showing up, by being present, by caring enough to pull someone back from the edge. The holidays approached, and Jack found himself facing his first Christmas in the new house with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Christmas had always been Sarah's holiday. She'd loved decorating, baking, making everything magical for Sophie. The past 3 years, Jack had gone through the motions, putting up a tree because Sophie expected it, buying presents because that's what you did. But his heart hadn't been in it. This year felt different. Sophie wanted to decorate the house, wanted to bake cookies, wanted to make it special. And Jack found he wanted that too. wanted to create new traditions while honoring the old ones, wanted to fill the house with light and warmth and joy. "We should get a real tree this year," Sophie announced one evening at dinner. "A big one that smells like Christmas." "We always got real trees," Jack said. "I know, but the last couple years they were small, and you always looked sad when we decorated them." Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, no accusation in it, just observation. "This year I want a tree that makes you happy." Jack reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Any tree we pick together will make me happy." They went tree shopping the following Saturday, and somehow Rachel and the twins ended up coming along. What should have been a simple errand turned into an adventure, the girls running between trees, declaring each one perfect until they found the next one. Rachel and Jack followed behind, laughing at their enthusiasm, offering opinions that were universally ignored. Finally, they settled on a 7-foot Douglas fir that was full and green and smelled exactly like Christmas should smell. Jack tied it to the roof of his truck while the girls bounced with excitement and Rachel took photos on her phone. "Send me those," Jack said as they were loading back into their vehicles. "Already did." Rachel's smile was warm. "This was fun. We should do it again." "Tree shopping is generally a once-a-year activity," Jack pointed out. "You know what I mean." Rachel's eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary. "Spending time together. All of us. It's nice." It was nice. That was the thing Jack kept coming back to as he drove home with Sophie singing Christmas carols in the back seat and a tree strapped to his roof. This was nice. His life was nice. Not perfect, not without challenges, but fundamentally, genuinely good, in a way it hadn't been in years. They decorated the tree that evening, and Jack pulled out the ornaments he'd carefully packed away. The ones Sarah had collected, the ones Sophie had made in preschool, the ones that told the story of their family. He hung each one carefully, and Sophie helped, and they told stories about Christmas's past and plans for Christmas's future. "This one was Mom's favorite," Sophie said, holding up a delicate glass angel. She said it reminded her of her grandmother. "Your great-grandma Rose," Jack confirmed. "She gave that to your mom on their last Christmas together." Sophie hung it on a prominent branch, stepping back to admire it. "I wish I'd known her. Great-grandma Rose. She was a lot like your mom, kind, strong, always putting others first." Jack wrapped an arm around Sophie's shoulders. "She would have loved you so much." They finished decorating, plugged in the lights, and stood back to admire their work. The tree glowed in the darkened living room, casting warm light across the walls, making the house feel magical and lived in and loved. "It's perfect," Sophie whispered. "Yeah," Jack agreed, "it really is." Work at Myers Industries ramped up as the year drew to a close. Jack's division had exceeded all projections. They'd trained over 500 people, signed contracts worth millions, and established themselves as legitimate players in the emergency preparedness field. Rachel called a meeting in mid-December to discuss the year-end numbers and plan for the next year. "What you've built here is remarkable," Rachel told Jack and his team, standing at the head of the conference room, her expression proud. "In less than 6 months, you've created a division that's not only profitable but genuinely making a difference. School districts are reporting better response times, more confident staff, and parents who feel their kids are safer. That's impact. That's what we're here for." After the meeting, Rachel asked Jack to stay behind. He waited as the others filed out, curious and slightly nervous. Had he done something wrong? Missed something? "Relax," Rachel said, reading his expression. "This is good news. Sit." Jack sat. Rachel pulled out a folder, slid it across the table to him. "This is your year-end bonus," she said, "and a proposal." Jack opened the folder and his eyes widened. The bonus was substantial, more money than he'd made in his best year at the garage. But it was the proposal that really caught his attention. Rachel was suggesting they expand the division, double the staff, take on bigger clients. And she wanted Jack to transition from division head to vice president of emergency services. "VP?" Jack looked up at her, stunned. "Rachel, I've been here 6 months, and you've proven yourself 100 times over. You're a natural leader, Jack. Your team respects you, clients trust you, and you understand both the technical and human sides of this work better than anyone I've ever met." Rachel leaned forward, I'm not offering this out of sentiment. I'm offering it because it's the right business decision. Jack read through the proposal, his mind spinning. More responsibility, yes, but also more resources, more impact, more opportunity to build something that really mattered. A salary that would let him not just provide for Sophie, but give her opportunities he'd never dreamed of. Stock options that could mean real financial security for their future. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, take the holidays. We'll talk in January. Rachel smiled. But Jack? Say yes. You've earned this. That evening, Jack sat Sophie down and explained the opportunity. She listened carefully, asked smart questions about what it would mean for their time together, whether he'd be traveling more, if it would change things at home. It might mean I'm busier sometimes, Jack admitted. More responsibility usually means more work, but it also means I can give you things I couldn't before. Better schools if you want them, camps and activities, college, without worrying about loans. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, absently petting Max, who had his head in her lap. Then she said, Mom always told me that the best things in life aren't stuff. They're people and time and love. Jack felt his throat tighten. She was right. But she also said it's okay to want things to be better, to work hard and build something. Sophie looked up at him. Are you going to be happy doing this? Or are you going to be stressed and worried all the time like you were at the garage? It was such a perceptive question, so much wiser than her years. Jack thought about it honestly. I think I'll be challenged, sometimes stressed probably, but happy? Yeah, I think I will be. Then you should do it. Sophie's voice was certain. We'll be okay, Dad. We're always okay when we're together. Jack pulled her into a hug. This remarkable little girl who'd grown up too fast but somehow stayed wise and kind through all of it. When did you get so smart? I keep telling you, Sophie said, her voice muffled against his chest. I get it from you. Christmas arrived bright and cold, the kind of perfect winter day that looked like a greeting card. Jack and Sophie woke early, made pancakes shaped like snowmen, and opened presents by the tree while Max investigated all the wrapping paper with intense curiosity. Sophie loved everything, books and art supplies and a new bike for the spring. Jack's gifts from Sophie were handmade, a clay paperweight she'd made in art class, and a card with a drawing of the three of them, Jack, Sophie, and Max, standing in front of their house under a rainbow. We're home, the caption read in Sophie's careful handwriting. Finally. Jack held that card for a long time, feeling something break open in his chest. Not painful this time, but releasing. Like a door he'd kept locked was finally swinging open, letting in light. Rachel had invited them for Christmas dinner, and they arrived in the afternoon to find the Myers house transformed into a winter wonderland. Lights everywhere, decorations that must have cost a fortune, and the smell of cooking food that made Jack's mouth water. I may have gone overboard, Rachel admitted, greeting them at the door. The girls insisted on decorating every surface. It's beautiful, Jack said honestly. Our house looks like minimalists live there compared to this. That's because you have taste, and I have an unlimited budget and no restraint. Rachel laughed, taking their coats. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready. It was one of the best Christmases Jack could remember. The food was incredible. Rachel had hired a chef, which felt extravagant but resulted in a meal that was restaurant quality. The girls played together, showing off their presents, making plans for New Year's, and the adults sat by the fire drinking wine, talking about everything and nothing. I wanted to thank you, Rachel said during a quiet moment when the girls were occupied in the other room, for being part of our lives this year, for letting us be part of yours. You don't have to thank me for that. I know, but I want to. Rachel's expression was soft, vulnerable. This is the first Christmas since my divorce that I felt actually happy instead of just going through the motions. Having you and Sophie here, building this friendship, it matters, Jack, more than I know how to say. Jack understood because he felt the same way. For 3 years, he'd been going through the motions, performing the rituals of life without really living. And somehow, through tragedy and circumstance and sheer chance, he'd found his way back. Not to who he'd been before, that person was gone, changed irrevocably by loss, but to someone new. Someone who could be happy again, who could build and hope and plan for a future that held more than just survival. "It matters to me too," Jack said quietly. "All of it. The job, yes, but more than that. The friendship. The feeling that we're building something good." Rachel held his gaze, and Jack saw understanding there, recognition of something they both needed but couldn't quite name. Not romance, neither of them was ready for that, might never be ready. But connection. Partnership. The knowledge that they weren't alone in navigating the complicated terrain of single parenthood and building lives from broken pieces. "To building something good," Rachel said, raising her wine glass. Jack clinked his glass against hers. "To building something good." The evening ended with the girls performing an impromptu play they'd written about a princess and a dragon and a brave knight, with Max playing the role of the dragon with confused enthusiasm. Jack and Rachel applauded, took photos, laughed until their sides hurt. And when it was time to leave, the goodbyes were warm and genuine, full of promises to do this again soon. Driving home through the quiet streets, Christmas lights twinkling in windows, Sophie asleep in the back seat, and Max curled beside her, Jack felt something settle in his chest. Peace. That's what it was. For the first time in 3 years, he felt at peace with his life, with his choices, with the direction he was heading. Sarah would be proud. He knew that with a certainty that went bone deep. Proud of the job, of the house, of how he was raising Sophie. Proud that he'd found a way to be happy again without forgetting her, without leaving her behind. She was still there in every good choice he made, every moment of joy he let himself feel, every time he chose hope over fear. "We did good this year, Sarah," Jack whispered to the darkness. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time since he'd stood at her graveside, watching them lower her casket into the ground, Jack believed it completely. The new year arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the universe was offering Jack a gentle entry into what would become the most transformative period of his life. On January 2nd, he walked into Rachel's office and accepted the vice president position, shaking her hand across the desk while trying to ignore the way his heart hammered with equal parts terror and excitement. "You won't regret this," Rachel said, and her smile was genuine, proud. "You're going to do amazing things, Jack." "I hope you're right," Jack replied, but he was smiling too, feeling the weight of possibility settle on his shoulders like a mantle he was finally ready to wear. The promotion meant changes, some immediate and some gradual. Jack's office moved to the 15th floor, the executive level, with views of downtown Indianapolis that still made him pause sometimes to marvel at how far he'd come. His team doubled in size as they brought on new trainers and administrative staff. The contracts grew larger and more complex, a major university system, a chain of hospitals, even preliminary talks with the state government about statewide emergency preparedness protocols. But the biggest change was internal, something Jack felt more than saw. He'd spent 3 years in survival mode, making decisions based on fear and desperation, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now, for the first time since Sarah's diagnosis, he was making choices from a place of strength, planning for a future instead of just trying to survive the present. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measure. Diana became his director of operations, a promotion she'd earned 10 times over with her dedication and skill. She hired 2 assistants and started developing a training certification program that could scale nationally. Hector called one evening to say the garage was doing well, that he'd hired 2 more mechanics, and was thinking about expanding into commercial fleet maintenance. Life was moving forward, pieces clicking into place, and Jack was learning to trust that maybe, just maybe, things could stay good. Sophie thrived in the new house, making friends in the neighborhood, bringing home report cards that made Jack beam with pride. She joined the school choir and started taking piano lessons, showing an aptitude that reminded Jack of Sarah's musical inclinations. Max grew from cautious shelter dog to confident family member, his tail always wagging, his presence a constant source of comfort and joy. And through it all, Rachel was there. Not hovering, not managing, but present. They fell into a routine of coffee most mornings, talking about work, but also about life, about the challenges of single parenthood, about the weight of responsibility and the unexpected moments of grace. Their friendship deepened into something Jack hadn't had since Sarah died. A true partnership, someone who understood him at a fundamental level. It was in late January when things shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Jack was working late on a proposal for the state contract, the office quiet around him, when Rachel appeared in his doorway with 2 cups of coffee and a tired smile. "Thought you could use this," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk with the ease of familiarity. "You're a lifesaver." Jack accepted the coffee gratefully. "This proposal is going to be the death of me. The state wants everything: comprehensive training, ongoing support, real-time response coordination, but their budget is barely enough to cover half of it. So get creative. That's what you're good at." Rachel sipped her own coffee, watching him with an expression Jack couldn't quite read. "You have a gift for making things work that shouldn't work on paper." "I learned that from 3 years of keeping a failing garage afloat," Jack said wryly. "You learned it from being you, from never giving up even when giving up would have been easier." Rachel paused, seemed to be weighing her words. "Can I tell you something? That day you came in for your first interview, I already knew I was going to offer you the job. The interview was just confirmation." Jack looked up, surprised. "You knew?" "I knew, because I'd spent 3 years remembering the mechanic who'd fixed my car in the middle of the night and refused payment. 3 years wondering what kind of person does that, what drives someone to help a stranger without expecting anything in return. And when you saved my daughters, when I realized you were the same man—" Rachel's voice caught slightly. "I knew I'd found someone rare. Someone who understands that the measure of a person isn't what they achieve, but who they help along the way." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Jack wasn't sure he was ready to examine. He set down his coffee cup carefully, trying to find a response that wouldn't cheapen what Rachel had just shared. "I'm just trying to do right," he said finally. "By Sophie, by the people who count on me. That's all I've ever tried to do." "I know, that's what makes you who you are." Rachel stood, and the moment shifted back to something easier, lighter. "Go home, Jack. The proposal will still be here tomorrow. Sophie needs her dad, and you need sleep." She was right, of course. Jack packed up his laptop and headed home, but her words stayed with him during the drive, during the quiet evening with Sophie, during the hours he lay awake staring at the ceiling. Something was changing between him and Rachel, something he couldn't quite name but could feel building like pressure before a storm. It wasn't romance, or not just romance. It was recognition, understanding, the slow, careful building of something that could become whatever they needed it to be. February brought Sophie's 9th birthday, and Jack threw her a party at the house with a dozen screaming kids, pizza, and a cake shaped like Max that Sophie declared was the best cake in the history of cakes. Emma and Ellie were there, of course, and Rachel stayed to help manage the chaos, laughing as kids ran through the house playing some complicated game that seemed to involve a lot of shrieking and zero discernible rules. "This is what childhood should look like," Rachel said, watching the girls disappear upstairs in a pack, loud and messy and full of joy. "It's definitely loud," Jack agreed, picking up abandoned paper plates. "I'm going to be finding cake frosting in weird places for weeks." "Worth it, though." Rachel grabbed more plates, helping him clean. "Look at her face. When was the last time you saw Sophie that happy?" Jack looked toward the stairs where Sophie had gone, and his chest tightened with love and gratitude. Rachel was right. This was what he'd been fighting for through all the hard years. Moments like this, where his daughter could be a kid, could be carefree and joyful, and surrounded by friends who loved her. "Thank you," he said to Rachel, "for being part of this, for bringing Emma and Ellie into her life. She was lonely before, I think. I didn't realize how much until now." "She wasn't the only one," Rachel said softly, and when Jack met her eyes, he saw understanding there, the same recognition he'd been feeling. They were both lonely, both building lives from broken pieces, both learning to trust that good things could last. The moment was interrupted by a crash from upstairs, followed by Sophie's voice calling, "It's okay, nobody's hurt. Well, Max is confused, but he's fine." Jack and Rachel looked at each other and burst out laughing, the tension breaking into something warm and easy. They climbed the stairs together to assess the damage. Apparently someone had knocked over a lamp while demonstrating a cartwheel, and the rest of the party passed in controlled chaos that somehow never quite tipped into disaster. Later, after the guests had left and Sophie was crashed on the couch in a sugar coma, Rachel lingered in the doorway while Jack cleaned up the last of the party debris. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "Let you have your evening. You don't have to rush off." Jack straightened, wadding up a trash bag. Unless you have somewhere to be? The twins are at my sister-in-law's for the night. She's been wanting more time with them. Rachel leaned against the doorframe, her expression thoughtful. So no, nowhere to be. Stay for dinner then. I'm just going to order Chinese, nothing fancy, but there's plenty. Rachel hesitated, and Jack could see her weighing something, making a decision. Finally, she nodded. Okay, yeah, I'd like that. They ordered too much food, Jack's usual habit, born from years of never quite knowing when he'd be able to afford the next meal, and ate at the kitchen table while Sophie snoozed in the living room and Max begged shamelessly for scraps. The conversation flowed easily, touching on work and the kids and a new book Rachel was reading. But underneath it all, Jack felt that same undercurrent of something shifting, changing, becoming more than it had been. Can I ask you something personal? Rachel said as they were cleaning up the takeout containers. Sure. Do you ever think about dating again? I mean, it's been 3 years since Sarah passed, and you're young, Jack. You have a whole life ahead of you. The question caught Jack off guard. He rinsed a plate slowly, buying time to formulate an answer. Sometimes, but honestly, between Sophie and work and just learning how to be okay again, I haven't had the energy to think about it seriously. Would you want to? Eventually, I mean. Jack turned to face her, studying her expression. She looked genuinely curious, not judgmental or pushing. I don't know. Maybe. If I met someone who understood my life, who got that Sophie comes first, who didn't expect me to be someone I'm not. He paused. What about you? Do you think about dating? Rachel laughed, but it was tinged with sadness. Sometimes, but my track record isn't great, and finding someone who isn't intimidated by a woman who runs a company and raises 2 kids alone, she shrugged. It's not easy. Most men either want to fix me or resent that I don't need fixing. You don't need fixing, Jack said firmly. You're doing an incredible job with the girls, with the company, with everything. So are you. With Sophie, with the division, with rebuilding your life. Rachel met his eyes, and Jack saw something vulnerable there, something that made his heart skip. Maybe we're both doing okay on our own. Maybe we are, Jack agreed quietly. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither of them seemed quite ready to name. Then Sophie stirred in the other room, calling for Jack, and the spell broke. Rachel gathered her things, said goodnight, and left Jack standing in his kitchen, wondering what had just happened and what it might mean. March brought the state contract approval, a massive win that meant Jack's division would be training emergency personnel across Indiana. The announcement made the local news, and Jack found himself doing interviews talking about the importance of preparedness and the lessons learned from the bus accident. It felt surreal, being the public face of something this big, but he was learning to lean into the discomfort, to trust that he belonged in these spaces even when imposter syndrome whispered otherwise. The expanded work meant longer hours and more travel. Jack hired a new deputy director to help manage the day-to-day operations, a former fire chief named Marcus who had 30 years of experience and a gift for cutting through bureaucratic nonsense. With Marcus handling implementation, Jack could focus on strategy and growth, on building relationships with key stakeholders, and positioning the division for long-term success. But the increased responsibility also meant less time at home, less time with Sophie. He tried to be present when he was there. No phone at dinner, dedicated homework help time, weekend adventures that were just the two of them. But he saw the way Sophie's face fell when he had to cancel plans for a work emergency. Saw her disappointment even when she tried to hide it behind understanding smiles. I'm failing her, Jack confessed to Rachel one evening in late March. They were in her office, reviewing quarterly numbers, but Jack's mind was elsewhere. I promised myself when Sarah died that I'd always put Sophie first, and now I'm working 60-hour weeks and missing school events, and turning into the kind of father I swore I'd never be. You're not failing her, Rachel said firmly. You're providing for her, building a future for her, showing her what it means to work hard and build something meaningful. That's not failure, Jack. That's love. It doesn't feel like love when I'm missing her choir concert because I'm in Fort Wayne doing a contract negotiation. Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, You know what Emma said to me last week? She said, I wish I could be brave like Sophie's dad. When I asked her what she meant, she said, You're brave because you help people even when it's scary, and that's what heroes do. Jack felt his throat tighten. Sophie told her that? Sophie talks about you constantly, about how proud she is of you, about the work you're doing, about how you're making the world safer for kids. Rachel leaned forward. She's not feeling neglected, Jack. She's feeling proud. There's a difference. I still should be there more. Then be there more. Delegate more work to Marcus and Diana. Set boundaries around your time. You're the VP. You have the authority to structure your schedule in a way that works for your life. Rachel smiled. You don't have to choose between being a good father and being good at your job. You can be both. It was permission Jack hadn't known he needed. He started leaving the office by 6 most days, making it home for dinner with Sophie. He blocked off weekends unless there was a genuine emergency, protecting that time for family. And he found that the work still got done, that the division still thrived, that he didn't have to sacrifice everything to be successful. April brought spring in earnest, and Jack finally started the garden he'd been planning. He built raised beds in the backyard, filled them with soil and compost, and let Sophie choose what to plant. She picked tomatoes and cucumbers and way too many varieties of peppers, consulting gardening books from the library with the same intensity she brought to everything. Rachel and the twins came over one Saturday to help plant, and the afternoon devolved into organized chaos. Dirt everywhere, Max trying to dig in the freshly turned soil, the girls planting seeds with more enthusiasm than precision. But by evening, they had a garden that looked like it might actually produce something, and the exhausted satisfaction on everyone's faces made the effort worthwhile. This is nice, Rachel said, washing dirt off her hands at the outdoor faucet. The girls were sprawled on the grass, exhausted, while Max lay between them like a furry guardian. I can't remember the last time I just played in the dirt and didn't worry about anything else. There's something therapeutic about it, Jack agreed, drying his hands on his jeans. Getting your hands dirty, building something from nothing. You're good at that. Building things from nothing. Rachel's voice was soft, thoughtful. You did it with the garage, with the division, with this life you're creating for Sophie. It's impressive, Jack. I'm just doing what needs to be done. No, you're doing more than that. You're creating something beautiful out of tragedy. That's rare. Rachel looked at him directly, and Jack saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. You're rare. Before Jack could respond, Sophie called out that she was starving, and the moment passed. They ordered pizza, again, always pizza with kids around, and ate on the back porch while the sun set and the first stars appeared. It felt like family, Jack thought, like the life he'd lost and thought he'd never have again, rebuilt in a different configuration, but no less real. May brought Sophie's end-of-year school recital, the one Jack had missed last year because of the bus accident. He made sure to block out the entire evening weeks in advance, arriving early to get a good seat, his phone silenced in his pocket. Sophie performed Clair de Lune on the piano, her small fingers moving across the keys with a grace that reminded Jack so much of Sarah that his eyes stung. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, but Jack's was loudest. He caught Sophie's eye across the auditorium, and her face lit up with pride and joy. That look was worth everything. Every long hour, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. This was why he'd fought so hard to build a life worth living. For moments like this, when his daughter knew beyond doubt that she was loved, that she was his priority, that she mattered more than anything else in the world. Rachel and the twins were there too, having come to support Sophie. After the recital, they all went out for ice cream, the girls chattering excitedly about the performance and their summer plans. Jack and Rachel followed behind, listening to their daughter's enthusiasm, sharing small smiles that spoke of shared understanding. She's really good, Rachel said. Sophie, I mean, that piece is difficult, and she played it beautifully. Sarah used to play that song, Jack said quietly. When she was pregnant with Sophie, she'd play it every night, said it would help the baby recognize her voice after she was born. Rachel's hand found his arm, a gentle pressure of support. She'd be so proud, Jack, of both of you. I hope so, Jack managed, and Rachel squeezed his arm before letting go, the touch brief but meaningful. Summer arrived with heat and long evenings, and Jack took a week off in June to take Sophie on a real vacation, their first in years. They drove to the Smoky Mountains, hiked easy trails, splashed in cold streams, and stayed in a cabin that was rustic but comfortable. It was just the two of them and Max, no work calls, no emails, just uninterrupted time to be together. This is the best week ever, Sophie declared one evening as they roasted marshmallows over a campfire. Better than Disney World, probably. You've never been to Disney World, Jack pointed out, amused. Exactly. So this is automatically the best. Sophie grinned at him, marshmallow goo on her chin. Can we do this every summer? Just go somewhere and not think about anything else? Yeah, baby, we can do that. Jack made the promise knowing he'd keep it, that he'd protect this time with his daughter no matter what else was demanding his attention. Every summer, just you and me and whatever adventure we pick. Sophie's smile was brilliant, worth every sacrifice and struggle that had gotten them to this point. They stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, and when Sophie finally fell asleep in the cabin, Jack sat on the porch listening to the night sounds and feeling more at peace than he could remember being since before Sarah got sick. When they got back to Indianapolis, tanned and relaxed, Jack found his inbox overflowing and a message from Rachel asking him to call when he had time. He dialed her number while unpacking, putting her on speaker. "Welcome back," Rachel said, warmth evident in her voice. "How was the trip?" "Perfect. Exactly what we needed." Jack sorted through mail, tossing junk. "What's going on? Your message sounded important." "It is. Good important, though." Rachel paused, and Jack could hear the smile in her voice. "We got the federal grant, the one we applied for in March for the National Training Initiative. They approved it, Jack. All of it. $20 million over 3 years. Jack stopped unpacking, his hand frozen halfway to his suitcase. "What?" $20 million. To expand the division nationally, to develop the certification program, to build a training facility, everything we wanted, and more. Rachel's excitement was palpable. "This is huge, Jack. This changes everything." Jack sat down heavily on the bed, trying to process the magnitude of what Rachel was saying. "Are you serious?" "Completely. The official notification came yesterday. I've been dying to tell you, but I wanted to wait until you were back." Rachel laughed. "Congratulations, Jack. You've built something that matters. Something that's going to save lives across the entire country." After they hung up, Jack sat in his bedroom, staring at nothing, feeling the weight and wonder of what they'd accomplished. Less than a year ago, he'd been a struggling mechanic barely keeping his head above water. Now he was leading a division that would train emergency responders across America, that would save lives he'd never meet, that would ripple outward in ways he couldn't even imagine. "We did it, Sarah," he whispered to the empty room. "We actually did it." The federal grant meant enormous changes. Jack's team expanded to 50 people, spread across 3 states. They broke ground on a training facility in August, a state-of-the-art campus that would house classrooms, simulation labs, and residential space for trainees. The ribbon-cutting ceremony made national news, with Jack standing next to Rachel and the governor, trying not to feel like an imposter among people who seemed so much more qualified to be there. But he was learning to own his accomplishments, to accept that he'd earned his place through hard work and dedication and a willingness to keep showing up even when he felt inadequate. He was learning that being a leader meant trusting his instincts, delegating to capable people, and focusing on vision rather than getting lost in details. He was learning that he was enough, exactly as he was. September brought Sophie's first day of 4th grade, and Jack took the morning off to drive her to school. She'd grown over the summer, shot up 2 inches, and looked simultaneously young and impossibly mature in her new school clothes. They pulled up to Riverside Academy, and Sophie gathered her backpack, took a deep breath. "You ready for this?" Jack asked. "Ready as I'll ever be." Sophie turned to him, her green eyes serious. "Dad, I'm really proud of you for everything you've done this year, for not giving up." Jack felt his eyes sting. "I'm proud of you too, baby. Every single day." They hugged, and then Sophie was gone, racing toward the school where Emma and Ellie were waiting. Jack watched her go. This remarkable girl who'd grown up too fast but somehow stayed kind and brave through all of it. She'd be okay, he thought. They both would be. The year rushed toward its conclusion in a blur of work and life and small perfect moments. The training facility opened in October with the first class of 50 trainees from across the Midwest. Jack gave the opening address, talking about the importance of preparedness and the ripple effects of people who knew what to do when crisis struck. He talked about the bus accident, about the 15 children who went home because someone was there who knew how to help. And he challenged the trainees to be that person in their own communities, to be the difference between tragedy and survival. The speech went viral, shared thousands of times on social media, covered by news outlets across the country. Jack found himself recognized in airports and grocery stores, people stopping to thank him or share their own emergency stories. It was surreal and uncomfortable, but he learned to accept the attention with grace, to use his platform to promote the work rather than deflecting every compliment. Halloween came, and Jack took Sophie trick-or-treating with Rachel and the twins. The girls had coordinated costumes. Sophie was the Scarecrow from Wizard of Oz, Emma was Dorothy, and Ellie was the Tin Man. They'd tried to convince Jack and Rachel to dress up as the Lion and the Cowardly Witch, but the adults had held firm at simple autumn clothes and comfortable shoes for walking. "Next year," Rachel said as they followed the girls from house to house, watching them laugh and trade candy and race ahead only to come running back. "Next year, they'll probably be too cool to trick-or-treat with their parents." "Don't say that," Jack protested. "I'm not ready for her to be too cool for me." "None of us ever are," Rachel said, her voice soft with understanding. "But it happens anyway. They grow up and we learn to let go gradually, piece by piece." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the evening cool and perfect, the neighborhood transformed by decorations and the magic of children's imagination. Jack felt Rachel's presence beside him like a warmth, solid and real, and realized that somewhere along the way she'd become essential to his life. Not just his boss, not just his friend, but something more. A partner in the truest sense, someone who understood him completely and accepted him anyway. "Rachel," he said, stopping on the sidewalk while the girls ran ahead to the next house. "Can I tell you something?" She turned to him, eyebrows raised, curious. "Of course. This year, everything that's happened, everything we've built, I couldn't have done any of it without you. And I don't just mean the job. I mean rebuilding my life, learning to be happy again, becoming someone Sophie can be proud of." Jack paused, searching for words. "You gave me back my life, you and this opportunity, and your faith that I could be more than I thought I was." Rachel's eyes glistened in the streetlight. "Jack, you gave that to yourself. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it. Maybe, but you opened the door. You saw something in me I didn't see in myself." Jack took a breath, feeling like he was standing on the edge of something significant. "I guess I just wanted you to know that. How much it matters. How much you matter." They stood there on the sidewalk, surrounded by the sounds of Halloween, but somehow existing in their own bubble of understanding and possibility. Rachel reached out, took his hand, her fingers warm and solid in his. "You matter too," she said quietly. "To me, to the girls, to everyone whose life you've touched this year. You're making a difference, Jack Turner, a real, lasting difference." The girls came running back, bags heavy with candy, breathless with excitement, and the moment passed. But Jack kept Rachel's hand in his for a few more seconds before letting go. And when he did, they shared a smile that spoke of things unspoken but understood. November brought Thanksgiving, and Jack hosted for the first time in the new house. He invited Rachel and the twins, Mrs. Chen, Hector, and his family, Diana and her husband. The house filled with noise and laughter and the smell of turkey and all the traditional sides. They crammed around Jack's dining table, finally properly furnished, and went around sharing what they were thankful for. When it was Jack's turn, he looked around at the faces gathered there, his daughter, his friends, the people who'd become his chosen family, and felt his heart swell with gratitude so profound it almost hurt. "I'm thankful for second chances," he said simply. "For the opportunity to build something good from something terrible. For every person at this table who helped make that possible." Sophie squeezed his hand under the table, and Jack saw Rachel wipe her eyes across from him. They finished the meal, did dishes together in the kitchen while the kids played in the yard, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like this was exactly where Jack was supposed to be, surrounded by people who loved him, building a life worth celebrating. December arrived with the first serious snow, and Jack took Sophie to pick out their Christmas tree, their second in the new house, but somehow this one felt even more significant. They chose an 8-footer that barely fit in the living room, decorated it with Sophie's ever-growing collection of ornaments, and stood back to admire their work. "Better than last year?" Jack asked. "Different," Sophie said thoughtfully. "But still perfect." On December 20th, the anniversary of the day Jack had first met Rachel 3 years ago, though neither of them had mentioned it, Jack got a call from Chief Morrison at the fire station. There was a ceremony, the chief explained, honoring volunteers who'd gone above and beyond. Would Jack be willing to attend? Jack showed up at the station that evening in his suit, expecting maybe a handshake and a certificate. Instead, he walked into a room full of people, fellow firefighters, city officials, news cameras, and sitting in the front row, Rachel and the twins beside Sophie. "What's going on?" Jack whispered to Chief Morrison. "You're getting an award," the chief said with a grin. "Citizen Hero of the Year for the bus rescue and everything you've built since. Now get up there." The mayor gave a speech about courage and community service. Rachel was invited up to speak, and she talked about the man who'd saved her daughters twice, once by pulling them from a burning bus, once by refusing payment for fixing her car when she was desperate and alone. She talked about how one act of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives in ways we couldn't predict or measure. "Jack Turner didn't just save my daughters' lives," Rachel concluded, her voice strong despite the tears on her cheeks. "He reminded me that good people exist, that heroism isn't about grand gestures, but about showing up day after day and doing what's right even when no one's watching. He's building a legacy that will save countless lives, and it all started because he stopped to help a stranger on a dark highway 3 years ago." Jack received his award, a plaque and a medal that felt too heavy in his hands, and had to give an impromptu speech that he fumbled through, talking about community and the importance of being prepared and how everyone in the room was a hero in their own way. But his eyes kept going to Sophie sitting in the front row next to the twins, her face glowing with pride. Afterward, people lined up to shake his hand, to take photos, to tell him their own stories. It was overwhelming and humbling and made Jack realize just how far he'd come from that morning a year ago when he jumped into a burning bus without thinking. Rachel found him as the crowd was thinning, the twins chattering with Sophie about going out for celebratory ice cream. "You were amazing up there," she said. "I was terrified up there," Jack corrected. "But thank you for the speech, for being here, for all of it. Where else would I be?" Rachel's smile was warm, genuine. "Jack, you're—" She paused, seemed to reconsider her words. "You're important to me, to all of us. Hope you know that." Jack did know. He'd felt it building all year, this connection between them that had started with tragedy and gratitude, but had grown into something deeper, something he wasn't quite ready to name, but couldn't ignore either. "You're important to me too," he said quietly. "More than I probably say enough." They stood there, the noise of the fire station around them fading into background, just looking at each other with understanding and possibility, and something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. Christmas Eve arrived bright and cold, and Jack spent the morning finishing up work emails, determined to be completely unplugged for the holiday. He was putting in the last load of laundry when his doorbell rang. Rachel stood on his porch, bundled in a coat, looking nervous in a way he'd never seen her. "I know this is last minute," she said, "but I wanted to give you something before tomorrow's chaos. Just you, without the girls watching." She handed him a wrapped box, flat and rectangular. Jack invited her in, offered coffee, which she declined, and opened the gift with careful fingers. Inside was a framed photo he'd never seen before, the twins and Sophie from that first dinner at Rachel's house, all three girls laughing at something off camera, arms around each other, lit by summer evening light. "When did you take this?" Jack asked, his voice rough. "July. When we were at the pool." Rachel stepped closer. "I saw them together and thought about how they'd become sisters in all but name, how you'd become essential to our lives without either of us planning it. And I wanted you to have something that captured that." Jack couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He set the photo down carefully and pulled Rachel into a hug, feeling her arms come around him in return, solid and warm and right. "Thank you," he managed, "for this, for everything, for being part of our lives." "Thank you for being part of ours," Rachel said against his shoulder. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with emotion. "Jack, I need to tell you something." "Okay." "I'm grateful for what you did, for saving the girls, for the bus, all of it. But that's not why I'm here. That's not why you matter to me." Rachel took a breath, seemed to be gathering courage. You matter because you're kind and brave, and you make me believe in possibilities I thought I'd given up on. You matter because my daughters light up when they see you. You matter because when I think about my future, you're in it, not as an employee or even just as a friend, as something more. Jack's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. Rachel, you don't have to say anything right now, Rachel said quickly. I know it's complicated. We're both still healing, both have kids to think about, both have careers that are demanding. But I wanted you to know how I feel. That this past year has been about more than gratitude for me. That I care about you, Jack. Deeply. Jack looked at this remarkable woman standing in his living room, baring her heart, offering him something he hadn't known he was ready for. And he realized that maybe he was ready. Maybe he'd been ready for months, but had been too scared to admit it. Scared of betraying Sarah's memory, scared of risking the stability they'd built, scared of opening himself up to the possibility of loss again. But looking at Rachel, seeing the hope and vulnerability in her eyes, Jack realized that fear was a terrible reason to deny himself happiness. That Sarah wouldn't want him to spend the rest of his life alone, holding on to grief like it was all he had left of their love. That maybe, just maybe, it was okay to move forward while still honoring the past. I care about you too, Jack said, the words coming easier than he expected. I have for a while. Oops. I was just afraid to admit it, afraid of what it meant, afraid of rushing into something neither of us was ready for. And now? Rachel asked softly. Now I think maybe we don't have to rush. We can take our time, figure it out as we go, let it be whatever it needs to be. Jack took her hand, feeling the rightness of the gesture. But, yeah, I want you in my future too, as more than a friend. Rachel's smile was brilliant, transforming her face with joy. Yeah? Yeah. Jack smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in years. Let's see where this goes. They didn't kiss. That felt like too much, too soon, with emotions running high and years of complexity to navigate. But they held hands, talking softly about possibilities and concerns, and how to approach this with their daughters. About taking things slow, being thoughtful, protecting the friendship they'd built while exploring what else it could become. When Rachel finally left, Jack stood in his living room holding the photo of the three girls, feeling like he'd just stepped through another door into a future he hadn't dared imagine. Not replacing what he'd lost. He could never replace Sarah, but building something new, something good. Something that honored the past while embracing the present. Christmas morning arrived with Sophie bouncing on his bed at dawn, full of excitement about presents and traditions and all the magic of the holiday. They opened gifts by the tree, made cinnamon rolls from scratch, called Mrs. Chen and Hector to wish them Merry Christmas. And at noon, they headed to Rachel's house for the dinner they'd planned weeks ago. The day was perfect, food and laughter and the girls putting on another impromptu play. This time about Santa's reindeer staging a union negotiation. Jack and Rachel shared knowing glances across the table, small touches when the girls weren't looking, the beginning of something neither of them could quite name, but both recognized as significant. As evening fell and they prepared to leave, Sophie pulled Jack aside in the hallway. Dad, are you and Rachel dating? Jack's heart skipped. What makes you ask that? You keep smiling at each other, and you look happy. Really happy, not pretend happy. Sophie's expression was serious but not upset. It's okay if you are. I like Rachel, and Emma and Ellie are basically my sisters already. Jack knelt down, meeting his daughter's eyes. We're figuring it out, seeing what happens. But Sophie, you'll always come first. Always. That will never change. I know. Sophie hugged him tight. But Dad, Mom would want you to be happy. She told me that. She said the most important thing was that we were happy, and if that meant moving on someday, that was okay. Jack held his daughter, feeling tears prick his eyes, feeling Sarah's presence like a benediction. She had known. Of course she'd known. She'd given them both permission to keep living, to find joy again, to build new loves without diminishing the old one. Yeah, baby, he whispered into Sophie's hair. Yeah, she would want that. They drove home through the quiet streets, Christmas lights twinkling in windows, the world hushed and peaceful. Jack carried a sleepy Sophie inside, tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead. "Best Christmas ever," she murmured, already half asleep. "Yeah," Jack agreed. "It really was." He went to his own room, stood at the window looking out at his yard, at the life he'd built from ashes and determination and the kindness of a woman who'd seen potential where he'd seen only wreckage. In his pocket, his phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Thank you for today. For everything. For being you." Jack typed back. "Thank you for seeing me, for all of it. Merry Christmas, Rachel." A pause, then, "Merry Christmas, Jack. Here's to next year and all the possibilities it holds." Jack stood there in his bedroom, in the house he'd bought as a symbol of moving forward, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for 3 years. Peace. Not the peace of endings, but the peace of new beginnings. The peace of knowing that life could be hard and beautiful at the same time, that loss didn't preclude joy, that second chances were real and worth fighting for. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, covering the world in white. Inside, Max padded down the hall and settled at Jack's feet, a warm presence in the darkness. Upstairs, Sophie slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was loved beyond measure. And somewhere across town, Rachel was probably settling her own daughters for the night, thinking about the future they were all building together. Jack Turner had stopped at a railroad crossing one October morning and jumped into a burning bus without thinking. He'd saved 15 children that day, including 2 little girls whose mother would change his life forever, not with money or opportunity, though she'd given him both, but with recognition. With the understanding that sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving too. That heroism isn't about grand gestures, but about showing up day after day and choosing hope over despair, action over paralysis, life over mere survival. And standing in his bedroom, looking out at the falling snow, Jack understood that he hadn't just saved those children on the bus. In saving them, in accepting Rachel's offer, in rebuilding his life piece by careful piece, he'd saved himself. He'd found his way back from the darkness, not alone, but surrounded by people who'd become family, doing work that mattered, building a future that honored the past without being trapped by it. The morning sun had painted the fields gold when Jack stopped at that crossing a year ago. Now, on this Christmas night, he stood in the darkness and felt only light, only possibility, only the profound gratitude of a man who'd been given a second chance and had the courage to take it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new moments to navigate the delicate balance of honoring what was lost while embracing what could be. But tonight, Jack simply stood in the quiet of his home and let himself feel it all, the grief and the joy, the past and the future, the weight of responsibility and the lightness of hope. "We did good, Sarah," he whispered to the darkness one more time. "We're going to be okay." And somewhere in the silence, in the space between heartbeats, Jack felt her answer in the steady certainty that filled his chest. They would be more than okay. They would be happy, not in spite of everything they'd lost, but because they'd learned that life was precious and fragile and worth fighting for, even, especially, when it seemed impossible. The snow continued to fall, soft and eternal, and Jack Turner stood in his home surrounded by love, looking toward a future bright with possibility, ready for whatever came next.